guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Okay, welcome back everyone to Anonymous Bites Back. We have Australian whistleblower David McBride back with us for part 2, and we're going to go into a bit more detail this time. And I want to say welcome back, David.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's great to be back.
And to the listeners, I want to say please help to share this around. And if you share, please use a quote tweet so we avoid any shadow bans. Make sure that this broadcast gets seen all over the world, right? So I wanted to start with one question we discussed before, and that is an introduction in how you actually became a whistleblower, because you said like you are not like a natural born whistleblower, I guess, not a traditional one, and you kind of gradually got into this.
Yeah, no, I grew up in, my parents were doctors, and my father was kind of a relatively a famous doctor. He was involved with, in fact, he was really the first person to sort of see the connection between the drug thalidomide and how it was causing birth deformities. And he was just a relative. He was a young doctor. He was in his 30s. And he got quite a lot of fame from that. And so I went to sort of private schools. And even though I came from a sort of, a family where we believed in standing up for the right thing, we were very conventional. And I went to university. I went to law school. Eventually, I thought was one of the reasons I joined the military rather than continue as a lawyer when I was young, is that something about the law I didn't really like, in that you kind of had to just say whatever your client wanted it. If they were a rich corporation or someone accused of murder, you had to just kind of support them. And I never really was comfortable about that area of the law. And I believed in the military, you stood up for the weak against the strong, and I thought it was, I really bought into that, all the myths about the Second World War and the Greatest Generation, and I basically felt that the Western democracies were the good guys of the world, and to be a part of that military machine was supporting democracy. We thought, even though we didn't really, we weren't so unsophisticated to think that everyone in the Soviet Union was bad and everybody in the Western world was good. We did basically think communism was a bad system, and it was very oppressive. And when we were, I was part of basically think NATO alliance opposing the sort of I was part of basically think NATO alliance opposing when the Berlin Wall came down, and I thought that I was doing a good thing. My first patrol, my first military experience was in Northern Ireland, fighting what we used to call terror, fighting the IRA, and they were setting off bombs, killing people, and we considered the fact that we were sort of fighting them. We didn't really consider the wider political implications, but we thought that we were stopping bombs going off. Some of my friends got killed by bombs, and so I came to the Australian military and my time in the military pretty much believing that the Western democracies were a force for good, and while we made mistakes, the people we were opposed to were not good people. In fact, even at the time of while I wasn't in the military, at the time of the invasion of Iraq in 2003, I didn't protest against the invasion of Iraq, and I really kind of bought the government line that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and was willing to use them. And even if the intelligence wasn't maybe correct or accurate, I believe that they were probably well-intentioned intelligence mistakes and kind of well-motivated. As I think I might have described last week, it was a bit, my relationship with the sort of military is a bit like being married to, being very much in love with a serial killer, and you always cutting them slack, and being willing to believe their point of view when they say where they were on a particular night or whatever. You're always like, oh, you can believe their point of view, and it goes on for so long, and then eventually you just see something which is a small point perhaps, but that is a lie, and then suddenly when you think, wow, hang on, if that's a lie, what other things are lies? And you start looking back at things, and you suddenly see the full picture that someone that you've been totally supportive of, and always willing to give the benefit of the doubt of for a long time, is actually the opposite. And in some ways, it makes you even more angry than as you would be if you found out you were married to some serial killer. It makes you even more angry than the average person that always sort of suspected it, because you feel conned, and you feel you feel betrayed, that everything that you were meant to be standing for, you actually do the opposite. So that's kind of, we can go through more of the details of my later experience, but that was the experience I came to. And as late as 2003, in fact much later, I was always trying to see the government's point of view on various things, and I was amenable to that. And it was only after time that I saw that the government's narrative on particular events was actually false and motivated by different things than what they claimed. And it took about 10 years of seeing small things that we said not being true, that I kind of finally just said, look, enough is enough. We if we're not the bad guys of the world, we're getting pretty close. I'll leave it there.
Okay, and we discussed about a little bit, like last week we discussed a little about how the governments manufacture support for war, right? Yeah. Yeah. Then
I think this is one of the.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go on.
No, we were talking about the government that sponsored.
One of the big issues.
That is
yes,
the lag.
You go.
That the gov sponsors focus groups to do it. That's what I wanted to add, because not that the government does it itself, they sponsor certain groups that do it for them. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
Yeah, no, I'll go on that now. That is a very important point. It's kind of a key point, but it's a point we have to deal with kind of piece by piece. But it's one of the central problems of war with democracy. Now, in that war is about, when it's increasingly not about actually achieving a particular result in a particular country. And if you go back to the, in simplistic terms, a war that we would say was a justified war, like the Second World War when they invaded Europe to depose Adolf Hitler and free up the countries that it conquered. There was a specific aim in that war, and it wasn't about winning elections. It wasn't about becoming popular. Now, things have changed, and I believe that by the time the Afghanistan war came around in 2001, and the Iraq war came in 2003, they were seen as vehicles not only for extending American influence, but it was very much important that everything that was done, the ultimate goal wasn't really to, apart from getting influence over countries, but they needed to get approval. And while that doesn't sound that different, it makes a big difference. Again, if you draw it back into your an example of a relationship, but you're having a relationship with a particular person, and if everything you do is to win approval rather than to actually do the right thing, You give them gifts, and you pretend to do things which is makes them like you, but you're not. In reality, you're cheating on them or stealing their money or whatever. That's a little bit like the war efforts, where it didn't really matter what happened in Afghanistan, as long as we controlled the regime and the public never found out anything bad. So it became a war of perception, a war of advertising, and that's why the focus groups became important. And that's once that becomes the paradigm in which you run a war, it becomes a very bad thing, because it doesn't matter whether war crimes happen. The only thing that matters is if people find out. And if people find out, you just deal with it as in a public affairs, what we call public affairs, but in an advertising way. And that first you try to cover it up, and B, if you can't cover it up, you find some scapegoats and you throw them to the wolves and you say, oh, this is really terrible, we never do it. And it, in some ways, for that kind of war of imagery, war of perceptions, it's good to have enemies. I mean, they would have been rubbing their hands with glee when the Taliban were the perfect kind of enemy, and you could do whatever you wanted to them, and people would basically think it was a good thing. And you could, that's why I think we've got, there's been a graduation of the modern way of war, and that's why in Syria now we tend to just drop bombs from a great height in fast jets, because that looks good. That's a perception. You see that it's not a coincidence that you see every time we drop a bomb, you see the images of it, because it looks like we're being strong. It looks like we've done something, even though what's happened on the ground is often we've just bombed a shed or a piece of dirt, or we might have hit a grandmother, who knows. But the image goes, that gets a positive image with the voters of a bomb going off. But we don't have the negative image. We don't send troops on the ground there, because it's possible there's a negative image of a person coming back in a body bag and a flag draped coffin. That's bad. And so we tend to sort of, the Syrian campaign was sort of like the ultimate progression of modern warfare, where we just drop bombs from a great height. We don't really know what we hit. We don't really care. We say it was a success. If the enemy is say, look, you bombed a school, and you've killed all these children, we say, oh, that's a lie, that's just propaganda, or they did that themselves. And we never lose any soldiers. This is one of the, and this is what, and a problem, we create more terrorists, because we might fool our own electorates who don't know, they don't know, we don't know whether we really bombed an Iranian terrorist site in Syria. We don't know. We think maybe we trust, like I used to be, we trust the government. If they say that's the case, we think that probably, well, why would they lie? But we may have hit some grandmother's house, and we've now created 4 new terrorists who just say, how dare you kill my grandmother, and then claim that she was a terrorist, which she wasn't, and now I'm going to come to America, I'm going to blow up something in America. Now, a lot of our bombing campaigns, we end up creating terrorists, and we don't really achieve anything, because you can't really be sure what you're going to hit when you're flying at 10,000 feet at supersonic speed. And it doesn't really matter. If it's a war of perception, it doesn't really matter what you hit, as long as we get the photo, as long as we get that imagery, and as long as we control the press. The press puts out a statement saying, "Wow, we've given the enemy a bloody nose." And increasingly, the message that imagery is more important than the reality, and that has some very bad knock-on effects.
Yeah, I mean, I like that you go into that whole concept of information operations and kind of a war through perception, because in a lot of the wars we see as of late, it's something that's very much surrounded by tons and tons and tons of kind of mass propaganda and a mass amount of manufacturing consent, really, to excuse various war crimes. So I mean, I'm curious as to kind of going back a bit to how you became a whistleblower. I'm actually kind of curious as to how, like, what tools you use to be able to break through that massive amount of propaganda, because I feel like it's something that could at least help other people break through all this propaganda. So to hear how you were able to overcome all of that.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I'm glad you asked to bring it back down. And I heard another, well, more famous whistleblower than me, a woman called Catherine Gunn, who you might know about. It was had the movie starring Keira Knightley called Official Secrets done about her, and she was working. She was a bit like me in that she was working for the security services in Britain, and she saw that the US were asking Britain's spy network, I guess, to find out dirt on United Nations Security Council members, so they could be blackmailed to vote for the war in Iraq. And having joined the security services to do the right thing, she was appalled by this, and she leaked that document. But she said, and the story is well known, but her life was made a misery, and she had to leave, and she didn't end up going to jail, but she was lucky now. But people often ask her, they say, well, how do you do it? How do you be a whistleblower? And I liked her answer. She was like, just you don't have to do anything huge. You have to just make sure that your organisation follows the rules in small things, because we can only really influence the small things. But if you influence the small things, you will end up influencing the big things. And that was the case with me. Obviously, there are plenty of people who have large strategic concerns with what's going on, like I just talked about. And you're quite right to point out there's not much you can do if you're a person in an organisation relatively low down, and you, for example, you might work in a weapons factory or something like that, and you can't really do much about the coming war in Iraq or whatever, But what you can do is if they are using some sort of banned technology, white phosphorus or something in the weapons factory, you know that that's against the regulations or whatever, you can say, hang on, the regulation in relation to this weapon is, such and such, and we're not following it. And you really just push away at that small thing. And that's what I had to do. I could see that there were very large problems. I could see that we were fighting a war of perception. And I saw that in 2011 when I saw that we were just using PowerPoint, saying we were winning the war in Afghanistan. One of the key things was because the so-called war on terrorism is a very difficult thing. Even if you were actually fighting a real war on terror, it would obviously be very hard to do. So we decided, rather than try to actually beat terrorists or whatever, we would just say we were going to win. We were going to win the war on terror by saying we were winning the war on terror a lot. And I could see that in 2011. We weren't winning the war in Afghanistan. Everything was going wrong, but we just kept saying it was going well. And every year we just kept saying it was going well. And doing more and more PowerPoint. And as long as your PowerPoint said it was going well, it was going well. But of course I couldn't do anything about that. That's all strategic stuff, and you can't really make. If I made a complaint about that, I just would have been sacked. One American officer did. One American officer did make a complaint to say, hang on, we're just pushing coloured PowerPoint around here. We're not actually improving the life of Afghans at all. And he just got sacked. He just got sacked. So, and he was more senior than me. So the second time I was around, I had to be a bit more subtle. And what I did was I looked for areas where we did not follow the law, specific areas. I mean, this is my specialty. And sometimes it was only on very small things, but I'd say sometimes because the public affairs, the public image dominated everything. As I said, that didn't mean that we always covered up war crimes. That meant sometimes when we thought it was politically expedient, we would find scapegoats and we would make them into really bad people. Usually people who had no connections, very low down people that couldn't help themselves, because there was nothing like punishing a scapegoat to take the heat off the bigger problems. And so every now and again we'd find a scapegoat and we'd say, oh, this guy's really, really bad. If we make a huge show trial about this person, that will sacrifice the sort of immediate people, and they'll stop them coming after the really big issues. And so one of my original complaints was against, we were scapegoating people and we weren't following our own laws because it was all a show trial. And I said, hang on, this person's we're meant to do such and such, and we're not, and these are our own rules, and it looks really bad if an organisation doesn't even follow its own rules. And of course they just ignored me. But I was able to keep, like a little dog with a bone, I was able to kind of keep saying, hang on, the rules say X, and, we're doing Y. It's very strange. Can you explain why? And then I began to see the bigger picture, in that the reason that they were doing this kind of show trial, this scapegoat trials, was because they knew about systematic war crimes, and they were trying to distract attention from the systematic murder of civilians by people that they liked. It's a bit like having a football team when it turns out your star quarterback, is involved in a betting scandal, and you would do anything you possibly can to draw attention away from that. So you might find some guy, reserve bench or the janitor, and you make a big deal about what they were doing. So I was picking up on small breaches of our own laws and saying to the government and to the people, hang on, the law says this, we aren't following our own laws. And they got increasingly uncomfortable about it, because behind that fact was that they weren't following big laws. And my advice to whistleblowers is just be that person who picks up on the small things that are not being followed, because you can be sure if an organisation is not following the small things, they're not following the big things. And the litmus test is if you say to an organisation, you're not doing this, we're meant to be doing that, and instead of correcting it, or instead of giving you some sort of civil response, you become the problem and the organisation turns on you, that's a pretty sure sign that there are bigger things there. And it's really, sometimes you just have to be like, you're that man standing in front of the tank in Tiananmen Square. What you're doing is relatively small, but it has a big thing. If everybody in all the organisations, because there are procedures, there are laws, there is so much compliance out there, but the problem is it's just never followed. And if you can stand up for the small things, you'd be surprised what you can achieve in big things.
Can you
That's
can you
good
talk
advice,
for a
thank
minute?
you.
Can you talk for a minute, David, about the process that you went through, just when you got to the point, going to the point to where you decided to go forward into the media with this, because you did try to go through proper channels, and you went, there was a it's just so that people know the process that whistleblowers whistleblowers go through, because it's not like you see something that is just out of hand, um, and then the next day it gets reported in the media.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a whole like there's several processes that take place during all of this, and Josh, I am close to the mic. I am.
And I didn't
I don't
turn
know what
I didn't turn Steve down
I
either.
really
I mean,
don't. I have done absolutely nothing to my sound settings or my microphone or any of this shit. The entire day, the entire time, I haven't changed anything. I
it's better
haven't.
now,
Maybe I
Steve.
should. I
He
don't know.
says.
You sound
Uh,
good to me.
at any rate, um, let us know what that was like for you, please, and then I want to stress to anybody who's listening who is getting inspired to be a whistleblower, call a lawyer first, just so that like you have that going forward. That's the first thing you need to do.
Yeah, I mean, I was a lawyer, and so it helped me about it. And I'm lucky. In fact, I was quite surprised myself, because everything gets a bit messed up when you're fighting the organisation. It's not for the faint-hearted. It becomes a bit like a horror movie. But I was surprised, and I was lucky in this way that the Australian police were good. But I wrote to the police quite early, and that I would recommend any whistleblower to do that. Normally they have confidential hotlines or whatever, where you can contact the police or the FBI, or whatever your equivalent is, and you can send them something and say, I think this is wrong. And I did that quite early, and that it's not going to, in a fair world, that would really protect me. It certainly helps. And to the credit to the police, they produced my early statement, and I was surprised how early it was. It was really only about 6 months after things got really desperate, and that really protected me. They didn't do anything. They called me in, and they did do anything. They brought me in and they gave me an interview, and they kind of had a bit of a discussion, and they sort of basically said, well, the military's a sort of beast of its own, and we can't interfere. And they basically said, well, if the government commits a crime, it's not a crime. They didn't, they almost had smiles on their face, and they weren't trying to, they didn't bully me or anything like that, but they were kind of like saying, we hear you. We know that, there's government corruption, but what can we do? We work for the government. It was quite clear it's very hard for the police to investigate the government, because they kind of investigating their own bosses, and it can be sort of a question of who's going to shoot first. I think it's happened a few times in America. People have started to investigate the administration or whatever. The next thing they know, they're sacked, and the investigation doesn't go very far. And that was a bit like in Australia, but it really protected me. And it was a well-written, well-argued statement. I was quite surprised, because as years go on, you just get more loose, and you just get, because you just get tired. But the first complaint I made, and I sent it off to the anonymous helpline, was quite well argued, and it was quite well written, and that will always protect me, because that was at least 2 years before I spoke to the press, and nothing happened. And that's one of the things that is for advice to whistleblowers: don't be put off by the fact you think, oh well, nothing will happen if I make an internal complaint. Yes, nothing may happen, but the important thing is you'll protect yourself. And after I'd spoken to the police first, I put in a very detailed internal complaint. And again, you've got to trust your instinct on these, and don't ask too much advice. Well, Steve said it's right to see lawyers, but lawyers can often talk you out of things, and eventually you've got to live with your own conscience, and you've got to, trust your instinct. I wrote a very detailed complaint when I was still in the military, before I'd seen the press or whatever. And I got a lot of, it wasn't easy because I got a lot of pressure from my boss, who was like, what are you doing? You know, you're meant to be working, doing your day job, and you're spending so much effort in this complaint. And it was really frustrating because I was like, well, this complaint is about, you know, corruption and war crimes and things, are really bad things that we're meant to be opposing. And it's not really a waste of time. It's really our core job. I'm a military lawyer. If something is really wrong in the military, it's part of my job to expose that. But obviously, there was a lot of pressure on me even writing the complaint, but I put a lot of time into it. It took me about 3 months because I had to work. I still had that work ethic, as most whistleblowers do. I saw a good quote last week to say whistleblowers, you know, they're painted as troublesome people, but generally they're people who take their job very seriously, and that was like me. I took my day job seriously, so I used to work in the day job, and then I would spend all night writing the complaints, you know, looking into the secret files and writing the complaints at night, you know, and typical is the kind of dichotomy of being a whistleblower is. I thought this was very important, and so I put my heart and soul into it, and it means that you have to make kind of choices about what I thought this was very, very important to the Western world. If we were committing war crimes, if we had become rotten, people needed to know. And but as a result, you know, I was drinking heavily in order to stay up late at night. I was abusing prescription amphetamines so I could stay up all night to write the complaints, and then I would drink to calm myself down. So you I've this is something I've already talked about in the public, but you start having to make, to achieve your goal, you end up sort of making kind of sacrifices. But I thought that was, you know, that was achievable. But it is hard. You have to kind of do your complaint at night. But I'm glad I put so much effort into that complaint, because again that holds me in good stead, because it was 20 pages of tightly argued, stiff upper lip kind of thing, with about 50 attached documents which proved what I was trying to prove, and they were all inquiries from the past. They were all factual inquiries written by other independent people that had said, on such and such a date in Afghanistan this went on, and following things happened, and then on such and such a date. And they were all very factual, and they'd all been prepared, and they were all, in a scientific way, it proved what I was going to prove. And I'm glad I put a lot of effort into that, because even though, I knew when I sent that off, it was unlikely to be upheld by the people above me, because they obviously knew what was going on, and they weren't about to just suddenly go, oh my God, you've told us we're breaking the law, we didn't know. But that protected me, that I made that internal complaint and I sent it off. And so before I went, a year and a half before I went to the press, and also that gave a basis of my, something which I could give to the press. One of the problems whistleblowers will have, and I've read a really good book for American, it's called Crisis of Conscience. It's right in front of me, I think. It's really, really good. I think it's by someone called Muller. And it deals with many, many examples of whistleblowers, and they all have one of the same problems is you will be a technical person, and you're complaining about not following procedures and as a technical person, you will see the larger ramifications of what's going on. Like, for example, in this book, there's a lot of people that work in the nuclear industry, and they can see that by just putting nuclear waste in and not following the procedures, just chuck it in concrete pits and covering it over, has the capacity to cause huge explosions. but it's not easy. And when you write your internal complaint, it'll be quite technical. It'll be talking about concrete structures and, the compliance and blah, blah, blah. And then when you eventually go to the press or whatever, it's not easy to get, normal people to understand why putting nuclear waste in a concrete dump is super dangerous, because it involves understanding of technical things. And that was one of the issues I had. My complaint was very legalistic. It was very well argued. It was stiff upper lip, because I'm still in the organisation. I'm still a middle manager in the organisation. So it's not sensational. It's just like saying, "Are you sure?" Because I was still at that stage. I was still hoping that a senior person might go, "Yeah, we see what you're saying. It was a war. We overextended ourselves, and we got a bit carried away with the positive public imaging, and I would have accepted that. I wanted to stay in the army. I really liked my job. It was a perfect job for me, and I was really hoping that they would say, "Yeah, we see where you're coming from. Thank you for pointing that out, and you're a really good employee. Thank God we've got you," because it is, in some ways, it's protective, as most whistleblowers are. You see a problem with an organisation, and you can see that if the organisation doesn't fix that problem, the organisation could be, destroyed, and the end of it. So you're actually trying to, as I said, even with Julian Assange and Snowden, people like myself, we're trying to actually help democracy. We're not trying to bring democracy down, because we can see that if corruption and all these terrible things continue to happen, the system will fail. And we're actually not against the system. And that was, I wasn't against the military. I was hoping that they could sort the issues out, because I could see that they could, if it went on unchecked, it could be disastrous. And I was still, at that stage, I was still hoping that somebody, it might be someone quite senior, would accept what I was saying and give me a pat on the back. And I guess that's one of the problem. This is where it gets dark being a whistleblower, because you sometimes have to go a long way before you find anybody that's going to give you a pat on the back. And that's why I'm so grateful to shows like this, and Steve and Mark and all the listeners. I cannot tell you how grateful I am. And that's not just some sort of throwaway line, because I'm not earning money out of this. It's not like you're fan. But for a long time, nobody listens to you. Or everyone you see just slams the door, and to get people to kind of listen and be interested is just like water in the desert. I mean, this was in 2014, 2015. I got arrested in 2018, so I had quite a few years in the wilderness where I was pretty close to suicide, pretty friendless, and I couldn't really get anybody to be interested in what I was saying. And so it's just to have people listening, and who are intelligent and kind of know how the world works, and are just questioning what's going on, is just amazing. So I'm so grateful for this show and your listeners.
Hey, so I want to ask something about the information warfare thing, right? Because like Steve just said, you went through all the official authorities, etc., trying to get them to help, but things really started to change when you hit the media, right? And that goes right into it, that the modern wars, or even if we're talking about the Vietnam War already, it is being fought largely in the media now. And back then, during the Vietnam War, they used Vietnam movies, etc., and always picturing the American soldiers doing heroic things and defending democracy on the other side of the world, where it's not even their place to be. But now it seems to be more happening on the internet and in the large controlled media, right? And Afghanistan is a good example of that, but now we're dealing with the situation in Syria, right? And it jumps right into it that Syria is really a media war, an internet media war. What would you think about that? What would you have to say
Yeah,
about it?
no, absolutely. And yeah, I was young, but I was a kid in Vietnam, and I've got these two sides of my personality. As I said, I grew up on the sort of soldier rumors and this, and I like the John Wayne sort of idea. But I could also see that the anti-war protesters had a point as well, and I think one of the terrible things about the way that progression, that evolution of the way we fight wars, is that we often learn the wrong lessons. Instead of Afghanistan was undoubtedly the modern Vietnam.
Hmm.
It is no better than Vietnam at all, and the lessons that they learned in Vietnam we was just better how to better control the media, rather than we would have hoped that the lesson they learned from Vietnam was don't prop up dodgy regimes in Southeast Asia against the popular will of a country. But unfortunately, the lesson that they learned was make sure that journalists don't run amok in a war zone, because they could lose you the war. And so in Afghanistan, we just controlled the journalists better. We didn't worry about making sure that the regime wasn't corrupt. We just thought the problem in Vietnam was that the journalists managed to get out stories of photos of sort of Vietnamese children covered in napalm, and that was bad. So we'll just make sure that never happens in Afghanistan. So it's kind of creepy in a way that we learn a lot of the wrong lessons, and the media was controlled better in Afghanistan, and it was it was a privilege to be a journalist to go with the Australian forces, but that was the way it was marketed. And obviously, it was a way to make money. If you came back and said, "Oh, I've got a definitive book about the soldiers in Afghanistan," you made a lot of money out of it. And so it was a journalist fought to go there, and the way that they selected it was that you had to write positive things. If you were getting there to try to pick holes in what we were doing, you would be sent home, or you wouldn't be given a ticket. So all the journalists were pretty much just riding the party line, increasingly just whatever. If they were given talking points, they would just write the talking points or whatever. There was no one there trying to pick holes. And so, there was a positive image about Afghanistan from the very beginning. No one was really, picking faults in the story, and that allowed it to be distorted. And I guess they've learned the lessons how to keep the media happy. And there's a lot of control of the media in small hands, and they're perfected making sure that the message is relatively good. It was a bit like we saw it outside the wars in the case of the American company Enron. When they managed to have positive media reports for many, many years, when it was clear that they were a shonky company, but they still could control the media. And unfortunately, I think there's probably a lot more Enrons out there than we know about, Ponzi scheme type things, but we're getting the lesson that they learn is don't be a Ponzi scheme, but make sure you butter up the media so you don't get found out. And I think that's right. The Syrian one is the logical extension of that. And we know, and if we don't have enemies, we can rate them. And I think that's one of the really scary things about the allegations of the sort of Duma gas attack. The idea that we said as if there's any poison gas used in Syria, we will go and we will start bombing and have regime change. And the idea that we might have planted that poison gas ourselves is kind of very scary. We're really getting to that 1984 thing where if we don't have an enemy, we'll make one. And that's the beauty of Syria type things, that no one's there on the ground. Anyone who reports from the ground is just ostracized as some sort of like apologist for a terrible regime. And the media is pretty much controlled now. It's hard for anybody to say anything which is outside the narrative, they're easily criticised as some sort of witch hunt. And that's, again, it's one of the strengths of my case to say, look, I'm from inside the system. I don't have an axe to grind against the military per se, but I'm against false messaging and false flag attacks. And there are limits to what we can do. I don't think it's good enough just to say, plausible deniability. I don't think that anything goes where we can just pretend something happened that didn't happen. And I think that is the way the world ends, when we start manufacturing enemies and then going into war as a result, and nobody says, really? That's enough.
Yeah.
It's insane how embedded journalists can get in this process of manufacturing consent for this war. Like you talked about with Afghanistan and with something like Syria, I feel like for me, that's just the war I remember seeing this mass influx of propaganda of all those children that were ripped away from their families and photographed, and all of the narratives around all the narratives around striking the Iranian-backed militias that really weren't Iranian, they were Iraqi. And then just today, Damascus was attacked by Israel again. So it's insane how all of this can just slide under the radar because of the reign that the media has over the perceptions of this conflict in the minds of the general public.
Yeah, no, it's scary, and they've worked it out, and it's expensive to run a war. It's hard to, results are sort of uncertain, but they've worked out it's much easier to run a media war, and it's still expensive. And I think this is one of the terrible things they found out in Australia is that often, and Vietnam was no different. Governments can fall as a result of a Watergate type thing, where there's a really big expose by journalists, whatever. But the government are not stupid. They've got quite a lot of money to spend on staying around, and they've realised that a lot of investigative, in fact, probably 90% of investigative journalists can be bought. And what you do is you find the best investigative journalist, who's the sort of person who's likely to do a big story to bring you down, and you employ them. You employ them to sort of do, and they're not that expensive. Compared to Jet or Bob, it's actually pretty easy to buy them off. And then there's no one to bring you down, and they're happy. Journalists are happy because at the end of the day they just want a job, get paid. So some of the first guy, it's a terrible irony. The first guy that I contacted, Australia's most famous investigative journalist, who had brought a government down in the sort of 80s. He brought a state government down, and exposed that it was all corrupt and people were taking bribes. And I saw him. And I was hoping he'd help me because I thought he doesn't scare easily. He has a sort of good moral compass and all that. And his heart's in the right place. And he'd been to Afghanistan, so he knew a little bit about what was going on over there. But increasingly, and we had a couple of meetings and everything, and increasingly he didn't really want to take the story. And as the years have gone on, it looks like he was already working for the government on the story, It's like, what? And yeah, he was involved in exposing sort of war crimes at low level, but there's no way is he going to criticise the government because he's kind of on some sort of government payroll. And that's a real problem. It's not, it's, when people like you and I, we talk about it, and people who are not experienced in this area think, oh, that's conspiracy theory, as if that's possible. But it is actually, it's just like selling Coca-Cola or cars or whatever. If you've got a big enough media budget, and they do have very big media budgets, they shouldn't be spending money on this, but they get around it because you would spend money on making us look like we're doing a good job in Syria. That would come under a head of national security. That would come under the same budgetary headings. There'd be a lot of euphemisms, but the same budgetary headings for making bombs and planes. So it's a very big pool of money. And it wouldn't be clear because they would be paying consultancy companies, who would be paying sub-consultancy companies. But yeah, huge amounts of taxpayer money would be going into that, buying journalists, getting positive stories out there, rubbishing the Syrian regime, rubbishing anybody that, backgrounding on anybody that says get something different going on there. I mean, it's pretty obvious to people like you and me, the faults in the Syrian narrative. I mean, and even WikiLeaks is crucial at this because they exposed Hillary Clinton's emails when she was Secretary of State, which said something like an incredibly naive or simplistic way to say we will sponsor what they might have called them moderate rebels, but they were clearly extremist terrorists. We will sponsor these people who are kind of hardline Islamic terrorists to fight the Assad regime. We'll give them money and bombs and whatever they want, and we'll create chaos in Syria. And by creating chaos in Syria, it will help Israel. And that's like a 5-line email. I mean, that's just dynamite. But the idea that never... Hillary Clinton's not in jail. She never even had to go and explain herself in front of a congressional committee, or, she's still a powerful figure, and obviously it's not just her, but nothing ever came of that. And that shows you how there is such a stranglehold on the media, where even though there were all these bombshell stuff that came out of WikiLeaks, this is one example, of course, but, hundreds of kind of really serious things that were exposed by WikiLeaks, but they don't get any airplay. And yet with a decent, if it was back in the 1970s, in the Watergate kind of days, that kind of thing would have been enough to bring the government down. And that people, if the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the Washington Post wanted to use the WikiLeaks material and really bang it home, they would definitely, they could get results. People would listen, as long as somebody with some sort of authority said, sponsoring Islamic terrorists in Syria, and giving them money to go kill people, and, effectively sponsoring ISIS and Al-Qaeda is totally wrong, and it's totally against what America's meant to stand for. If enough authority figures push that line, you'd get a result. But the terrible thing is they don't push that line, and they push the line that Julian Assange is a bad person, which is very worrying. Or that Assad is kind of Adolf Hitler, and as long as we get rid of him, everything's going to be fine. It's very worrying. And it's the sad thing is that if you've got enough money these days, you can pretty much get whatever story published you want. And some people will go to war for money, and so it seems to be it's kind of a bit of a terrible circle. No longer is any kind of sense of ethics. And maybe it wasn't for a long time, but that doesn't seem to really come into it. There's no sort of adult supervision to say, really, we can't start a war just for profit or just for some sort of short-term, gain to make Israel happy or something. We have to draw a line somewhere, but there isn't anyone, either in Australia or in Washington, who ever really draws that line. It's whatever you can get away with seems to go.
Okay.
That's it.
Yeah.
I'm just watching. I'm watching the show get censored in real time on social media. That's really don't like whistleblowers, especially when it comes to war crimes. And this is one of the things that should, I think, initially. Really? Can't hear me
Now,
at all?
now we
I
can.
haven't done.
Now we can. It's super loud now.
Oh,
Yeah, I
weird.
think you just have to get closer or something.
That's crazy. Um, Anywho, we're watching the show get censored in real time on social media, and it's nuts. Um, it should be one of those things that brings people who don't necessarily pay attention, or even if they do have a political team, it should bring them to a point where just blindly following the narrative stops being a part of their daily activity. Do you know what I mean? Because when you go, okay, here's direct hardcore evidence that your government, with your money and your sons and your daughters, here's what they do with it. How can you support the institution? How can you not want to, have a serious national conversation about what it means to, I don't know, be who you say you are according to your marketing?
Yeah,
I'm not expecting, governments to live up to the marketing, but I'm expecting the people to demand it of their government.
yeah. Well, that's it. That's the key point. I'm a true believer, and I believe that we need to follow democratic principles. And I'm not against the Republicans, or I'm not against the Democrats. I'm a little bit of both. I believe in the military and strong, but we need to walk the walk. We can't. It's a bit like working for a corporation, and you believe in the corporation, but you find out that we're not producing what we're meant to be producing. We're producing cars which explode or something, and that's it. We're not. Often whistleblowers are painted, especially war crimes ones. They're painted as sort of like anti-patriotic. This is what the guy that attacked me on LinkedIn last week was like. You're a traitor. You need to die as a traitor. But it's like, well, actually, I'm supporting the real Australia, what Australia is meant to stand for, and it's not my own little eccentric idea. We are not meant to kill civilians. That's part of our it's part of our ethos. We're meant to follow the law. We're meant to do the right thing, and also, at someone at my level, I'm meant to stand up for it if it's not done right. That's meant to be, it's kind of a whole Greatest Generation and Stars and Stripes is meant to kind of actually stand for, and I'm for that. I'm trying to make sure that we, as you said, that we stick to our brand and we actually do. We are what we're meant to be, and I consider myself a patriot and someone who follows the Constitution rather than a rebel. In fact, that's what I was thinking about it this morning, and that's you know this generation's greatest generation are not people storming the beaches in Normandy. This generation's greatest generation are the ones who, like us, like yourself, like your listeners, but who are trying to make sure that governments actually do the right thing as we're meant to do. It's a hard, lonely road. It's not quite the same thing as that sort of band of brothers, but it's effectively the same thing because our governments have become the problem. It's not sort of any sort of like totalitarian regime. The misinformation, the war is about misinformation. The war is about covering up crimes and exposing those. And actually, we are the ones who are fighting like the band of brothers. And it's not because we're not patriots. It's because we are patriots.
Yeah. Well, I wonder how much it has to do with apathy too, and problems coming from social media. I've seen interviews with former high up people at places like Facebook, and they say like, yeah, there is something going on with people, and they have this short attention span. They quickly share something and then move on. What's up with the apathy with people too? Because we know that these governments, like the U.S. government, have this almost imperialist view on the world, and they want to like gather resources and monetary gain and have more territories under control. That's what we expect. But do we expect it from the normal people too? And they seem to have some kind of apathy going on lately. I've seen it with I do fundraisers for Yemen, for example, and it takes us months to even get a few thousand bucks for a fundraiser in Yemen. Well, they see the kids dying in front of them, right? We're dealing with 24 million people who are facing hunger, and they have to choose between food and essentials like medicines. And when I see that only 100 people donate to actual people on the ground in Yemen, delivering food to them, directly helping, then I think like, what's up here? There's almost like an apathy going on.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, I noticed that, and I found that even with, in fact, it's worse with the educated, with the white collar professional. And I often found this when I was trying to get people interested in my case to begin with. The people who were less interested were my contemporaries from university and law school and were now sort of middle class businessmen. And often you'd get this sort of thing where people would sort of say, "Oh, the government's corrupt. I knew the government was corrupt when I was 12. You know, you're so naive that you're a little bit surprised about that." And that used to make me angry. I mean, I don't accept that it's okay for governments to be corrupt and it to all be a rigged casino. And I don't accept that we're not meant to do something about it when we see it. And it's but there is a certain and actually it's the educated class who have failed in Australia, because they're the people at the grassroots level, the working class, they don't necessarily understand the concepts involved and what's going on. They don't necessarily able to perceive that a war is unjust, or that justifications for war are not based in any kind of fact. But the people who do know better, the educated class and whatever, they do know, and it's really, that's part of there is responsibility that comes with a position in society, and you really, if you can see what's going on as wrong, you really need to do something about it. And I was disillusioned that more people who knew what was going on and had the wherewithal to explain it and do something about it chose not to. As you said, there's that kind of middle class apathy where they really don't care, and also the sort of things they're interested in. This is one of the things about the war crimes. I mean, it's a bit like, you can see it with the WikiLeaks. They have to push the collateral murder videos. It's taken a lot of, it gets people interested. You can see the pictures, and you can, it illustrates quite a lot. But there are obviously a lot more important, bigger things than the collateral murder video. In fact, even the story around the collateral murder video, whereas the local American commanders doctored the video and then went and showed it to the Reuters people and said, "Look, it's all okay." I mean, that in itself is far worse than the helicopter pilots shooting up civilians. The idea that the senior leadership then did a sort of complex cover-up in order to make things look right, and then the helicopter pilots were never punished. And then there's the higher levels you go up, and of course the fact that the whole war was stunk from the beginning, the higher levels you go up, the worse things are. But people are not really interested in that. When I was trying to get support from the journalist to begin with. You could tell if I'd had a story about a sort of a single rape or whatever, they would have been maybe interested. That was like something they can sell newspapers with. But if you've got a story about the government really being quite corrupt and, making an unjust war for its sort of corporate purpose, their eyes glaze over and say, oh, well, have you got any rapes?
Yeah, but even with the WikiLeaks situation, I noticed this half apathy. Like, it hits home with them. Like, they want to support Assange, but it doesn't. Like, sometimes it doesn't hit them in that way. That okay, so they stick to sharing news or making posts about it's so bad what happens to Assange. He's facing extradition. But I see very little from people actually sharing the documents released by WikiLeaks. Like. And that's all he actually wanted, was to have these documents published all over the world, right? That we all become Assange, that we all become the spreaders of this alternative news. That was the goal behind WikiLeaks, right? And for some reason, we hit that part. We're all angry that a journalist faces this, but we forget the actual message that was brought by him. And we have to disseminate all this news everywhere, all this information, because there is a trove of documents we need to share, right? And there's this half apathy going on. Like they want to defend it. They want to defend a journalist. They are not making the trigger that actually we go all in. We start spreading the information. We start doing what WikiLeaks was supposed to do.
Yeah, I agree, and I've often thought that myself. And the focus shouldn't be about Julian in jail, because I mean, at the end of the day, WikiLeaks needs to survive, or the idea of it anyway, and that it was about the documents, and that goes back to whistleblower protection. I'm sure Julian would agree. It's not whistleblowers don't need protection as much. They need action for what they exposed. And that's the terrible thing about the WikiLeaks, or even Snowden. This information was put out there, which showed that the US government and other governments were lying and not following their own rules and procedures, and nothing really happened as a result. And yeah, you're right. But I'd prefer to see the information disseminated and actually understood than any kind of protection ourselves. And that is the problem. Yeah, getting people to actually care about the information, and that's one of the ironies. In order to get people to care about the information, and maybe you had to package it and sensationalise that. But as Julian was quite right to say, doesn't want to get into that, because then that becomes kind of editorialised, and you're trying to make people think what you want them to think, and that's exactly what he was against. And but it's hard to get people, as you said, to care about. I guess in some respects you do have to editorialise a little bit for them, but and again, that's why in some ways the best statement I can make is being put on trial and maybe even going to jail, because it makes people actually having to look at the information. And that's why in some ways I was happy to get arrested, because I didn't make an impact before. The Afghan files came out, but it didn't really make the impact that I would have liked. It didn't cause a sort of really strong light to be shone onto the Australian government as to who knew what when and what was really going on. But when I got arrested, as I always knew it would happen, when I got arrested and I got charged for leaking the documents, that enabled everything to be looked at again, and that's what I was grateful about, because my defence will be that I did the right thing. I was justified because of the government broke the law, and because of war crimes, and because of various other things, and that will force those issues to be looked at, and that's one of the only ways you can do it, I guess, because it as a defendant in a trial, and this is what sometimes people don't emphasise. They say, how come I've got so much publicity? I've got publicity because I'm on trial, and the information that I leaked, therefore, has to be looked at as to why I leaked it. And it's obviously not I don't recommend it. It's a pretty hard way to get things out there. But if you really believe in what you're doing, it's one way anyway.
I think that's one thing that's particularly insidious about what happens when people smear people like Ed Snowden and Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange is the smears on them take focus away from the real crimes happening. Like, smearing Julian Assange takes takes attention away not only from something like the collateral murder video, but also like the whole trove of Iraq and Afghan war files and the Guantanamo files. So it's really it's really insidious and almost asinine what people have to deal with just for exposing crimes that really should draw the attention and should draw kind of the outrage of the public, because it's war crimes that are essentially being revealed. It's high level corruption and criminal activity, and it's disgusting, and it's also emblematic of how the establishment works, that they would rather have you focus on the person revealing that information than the actual crime itself.
Oh yeah, it's just like we're selling Coca-Cola now. It's all a big game, but they've worked that out. They smear the whistleblower, and people won't forget about people will forget about the actual crimes that they expose. But we all live with it day to day. But it would make your blood boil. The things that Julian Assange and Snowden exposed are huge deals, and the idea that that the focus is on something personal about themselves rather than this huge is quite outrageous. And yet that's the way it kind of works. And I saw that, and the mainstream media do not help. I mean, as I said, imagine if back in I think they tried to do it, but back in the Pentagon Papers day, and if they'd focused on trying to smear Daniel Ellsberg rather than the fact that the Vietnam War was based on a lie, they might have been successful. Luckily, the Washington Post and the Times and they focused on the problem that he exposed, and they didn't let the government successfully focus on the man and try to say that there was something wrong with him. And that's been reversed now. And if you ask most people in the street about Julian Assange or Snowden, probably even myself, they would talk about their appearance or this or that or various things that they've heard, but not about the huge things that they exposed.
Well, the thing is, though, David, they didn't have the opportunity to smear him in the press. That's why Nixon's goons were breaking into his psychiatrist's office. They were sent there to dig up dirt so that they could bury him in the press, and they got caught doing it, and the judge dismissed the case because of that. That's why the Pentagon Papers got thrown out of court. It wasn't for any noble First Amendment purposes, which the U.S. Justice Department has been quick to point out in a number of occasions, like when they thought they were in front of a friendlier audience.
Yeah, it's it's terrible, isn't it? And that's the problem. It makes you sick that they can try and destroy the person rather than the message, and people will listen. I saw this, and it's been successful. I saw this an example that really sticks in my mind. And I was speaking to somebody, a family friend, quite a wealthy person, and they're of Jewish extraction, and her mother survived the Holocaust, and then she survived the Holocaust, came to Australia, and now they're sort of successful and whatever, and they're sort of middle class, progressive sort of people. And Julian Assange came up in conversation, and she said, and this woman said, "Oh, I hate Julian Assange or something. He's a narcissist." And I thought, this is really interesting, because you're like a middle class, wealthy person whose mother survived the Holocaust, and you should be really, you would have thought that you really support someone who exposes, corruption and lies by, terrible governments. And yet you buy into sort of some sort of personal thing about Julian Assange and refuse to see the big picture about it, when you're actually the sort of person that I imagine should care about this. And it's been incredibly successful, attacking him and taking the focus away from what he actually exposed.
Well, I mean, that's the standard operating procedure. It's standard operating procedure for what a hostile or retaliatory government or corporation will do anytime someone exposes what they're actually up to, and people are just so primed in terms of other forms of media to like take delight when someone's dragged through the mud in the press. I don't know what it is. Like, sometimes you'll get people that will be like, okay, well, that's disgusting. Why are you doing that to that poor individual? You're a giant corporation, or you're a world power. But people take delight in watching the destruction of another human being, and it's insane to me. I've never really been able to understand it. There are a couple of bastards that I've cheered on the destruction for sure. And it was like a year ago, or a year anniversary of Harvey Weinstein going to prison the other day, and like, yeah, dude, that's cool. And what's his name, George Shultz, Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State there for a while, he died. Huh? Sheldon Adelson. Yeah, I really danced on their graves. But I will make exception for war criminals in that regard.
I'm the same. There's an expression, I don't know whether you're familiar with it, but it is in America. It's called a JPEL, which is a Joint Prioritized Effects List. It means the kill list, basically. And once you're on the JPEL list, there's a bomber coming after you. But I have my own JPEL list. And we've got our Secretary of Defense who had to resign. Well, hasn't quite resigned, but she's gone off on indefinite sick leave. And I'm like, yep, that's crossed off. And there's a guy who's trying to prosecute me. And he's in the government. I can't talk about it for defamation, but he's probably been he's been sidelined recently, and I'm like, yep, crossing him off the list. Slowly, one by one. But these are all people who are trying to put me in jail for the rest of my life. So I think I'm justified in kind of like rejoicing,
Yeah, because the reason they're trying to put you in jail for the rest of your life is because you had no other recourse other than to go to the media to expose the extensive, horrific crimes of the Australian military and government.
Yeah, that's right. The situation's pretty bad.
In case anybody's late to the broadcast here, this is Australian whistleblower David McBride, who again is facing life imprisonment for having no recourse other than to go to the media to seek some justice for the extensive and horrific crimes of his military and government.
Yeah, after no one else listened,
Yeah,
right?
and that's one of the things. And luckily, I've got. Well, that's right. Yeah, and that's one of the things I do have a fair bit of traction in relation to. A lot of people who know the case are like, they can't believe that I'm still facing trial after the Burton inquiry has come out, and even if I did obviously do, as we've heard, I went to the police and I made an internal complaint, and even before that, I was obviously verbally saying, "Hang on," every single day. What's going on here? So I was well known as someone who had questions about what we were doing. In fact, when the documents were finally released by the ABC, they posted them online, kind of in redacted format, but you could still read. They were redacted, but you could still see the original sort of cover pages and etc. online. And that's one of the reasons why I fled the country and went to Spain, because it was quite clear that I would be arrested, because I was like the only person in the military who was complaining for a period of years and years and years about the same things. So when these documents appeared online, it was pretty obvious as to who must have done it, because I made no secret of my issues within the military, and but even if I hadn't, some people, it just shows you how hypocritical they are, because they had, after the war crimes started getting exposed, there was a few TV shows where they interviewed still serving soldiers. People were still in the military, and they've got blacked out faces or whatever, pixelated faces. And and these soldiers are saying, "Yeah, look, I witnessed a murder," or something like that. They're giving first-hand or second-hand evidence of war crimes, and they're still in the military. Now, they have committed the same offence that I have, in that they are talking about classified stuff to a media organisation without permission. Yet they're not being investigated, and they're not being tried. And the reason they're not being investigated and they're not being tried is because the message they are giving out is something which is acceptable to the government. That is, a low-down soldier on a particular day murdered someone. The government's happy for that to come out because that doesn't expose the government. But the government want to put me in jail forever, even though the crime I've committed is the same thing, talking to people, journalists, about secret information. Because my story is slightly different. To say, yes, soldiers did, kill Afghan civilians, but also that the government knew, or the government didn't do enough. Now, that's what the government don't like. And even though both me and they have committed the same offence, they want to put me in jail, and they won't prosecute the other soldiers. And that's what it links back to the point we were talking about with Glory, in the sense that it's a war of perception, and anyone that damages the narrative about the government being good, they become a real enemy. I'm more of an enemy to the Australian government than Taliban, because I'm kind of pointing the finger at them. They don't care whether you leak. The Australian government leaks stories all the time. They leak their own stuff, which they think is helpful to them. They just care whether you leak against the perception, and you are a warrior in the information war. That's what they worry about. Are there any questions from people?
Yeah, we actually have a question in the chat from Oz Whistles. He wants to know, did you get any sympathy specifically from within the...
That's hard to know. It's a good question. I think some people within the Special Forces were happy with me because they knew that I wasn't going to let the soldiers take the fall for situations which were bigger than just a couple of soldiers. There was a couple of very bad soldiers, but there was also a leadership structure who rewarded the bad soldiers and punished the good ones, and that was what I was focused on. So I think some soldiers who were kind of with me at the coalface could appreciate that I was going into bat. I don't think the psychology of being a whistleblower is that most sort of people of my rank level and who are lawyers will not support you because they kind of think it makes people defensive. If they hear that you're agitating against something, it says something inside their own brain. Well, should I be agitating? And then they think, well, no, I'm not. And so in order to make themselves feel better, they kind of want to oppose you and say, oh, no, well, you're wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. And so you end up, most people kind of oppose you because they think that by you standing up and them not standing up, it is somehow some sort of judgment against them that they should have done something and they didn't because they knew the same kind of thing. I didn't get any support at all from fellow legal officers, or that. I think soldiers have a fair bit of sympathy for me in that I'm standing up against the leadership bullshit. But also, there's so much misinformation out there. There's smear campaigns against me, so a lot of people don't necessarily know the facts about what I stand for. I get some people that really like me and some people that really hate me. I like to think that soldiers have to be very careful. Sometimes people would contact me and say, I support you, but I can't be seen to support you because, the organisation is extremely ruthless. And if anyone, my phones and everything are obviously monitored and have been monitored for a long time. And if anybody's still serving in the military's phone number came up on my list and contacted me, they may well lose their security clearance or get thrown out or whatever. We fight whistleblowers very hard, and anyone who's associated with me, even in a kind of a casual way, could jeopardise their own career. And but I do occasionally. What makes me hardened is I run. Actually, I was wrong when I said no lawyer support. I have run into the occasional military lawyer who is gives me a smile and shakes my hand, and they don't say much more, but that goes a long way. There are a few out there, and even if they kind of have different views, that it is nice to see that people are not afraid to acknowledge you. And I've had one general who was a really good general. I've always thought was a really a good person who knew what leadership was about, and understood what was right and what was wrong and the difference. Who didn't run his campaign according to popularity. He used to run his unit about what was right. And I saw him in the street one day, and he said, "G'day, David," and then he was walking. He was obviously going somewhere, and I was going somewhere. And I didn't quite recognise him. And I thought that was nice, because for a senior military, he'd left the military, only just, but he still works in a sort of military capacity. And it was nice. It's always nice when they acknowledge you and say hello, and they don't feel like they have to cross the other side of the street. And that's rare, but you do meet people who will happily shake your hand and look you in the eyes, and I've got so much time for them, because they don't have to agree with me, but the idea that they don't feel that they have to try to destroy me, or they can't see that, at least, if nothing else, I obviously believe in what I'm doing, and I'm well-intentioned, and even most of my enemies will have to admit that. Often they'll say, "Oh, he's pretty crazy, he's wound up too tight," but if you drill down and say, "Well, do you think he actually believes what he's doing is right?" And they'd probably have to say, yeah, he believes what he's doing is right, but we never did anything wrong in Australia, whatever. You'd soon find out that they have to admit that I am motivated by what I think is right for the country and right for the future. Um, and um, and how bad can that be? But you don't necessarily. You do get a little bit of support from the military, but people, I guess, are waiting. If I win my case, everybody will want to be my friend,
Hmm.
But people don't want to speak up until they know the result.
You know what's interesting, David, is you like we listed this whole list of questions, and we're going through it pretty fast. I'm like shocked with it, but I do want to ask you about Chelsea Manning, right? I mean, because you mentioned that
Yeah,
specifically
yeah.
that subject. So, uh, in- because she went through kind of like a similar situation with the United States, right?
Yeah, the reason I thought Chelsea Manning was quite of a good thing to talk about, yeah, we're a rough equivalent, was, and this is one of the ways we were just talking about it before, tell Julian Assange to make people understand, normal people understand that he's actually a force for good and not some sort of a cyber terrorist, as they call him. Um, and Chelsea Manning is quite a good example of that. Because despite the public imagery, Julian Assange didn't go around stealing the documents by mining into the whatever the classified sites. He was given the documents, and he was given the documents by people like Chelsea Manning, and obviously the diplomatic cables were given. He was given the documents by someone, presumably in the State Department, and there would be plenty of people like this who had spent a lifetime of service to the United States, and like me, became very concerned that we had lost our way and we were no longer the good guys of the world, and we were doing all sorts of underhand things in order to win the war on terror or whatever it was, what our goal was. But we were becoming the terrorists. We were becoming liars, cheaters, dirty, double-crossing things. Well, there was nothing we wouldn't do anymore. As I said, we were sponsoring Islamic, hardline, fanatical people in Syria, and no one was thinking the lessons of 9/11. Whereas these people could have ended up coming to New York City and blowing it up. We didn't know that, but we were doing a lot of silly things. And people within the US organization, lifetime diplomats, people like myself, people like Chelsea Manning, they gave WikiLeaks documents. They gave WikiLeaks because they said, this is not us. This is not the United States of America I grew up in and that I fought for and that I joined the State Department. It was people within the United States, like myself and Chelsea and other people, a reality winner or Edward Snowden. These are all people that actually believe in the principles that the United States, I think it's a great country. But it's the government has been hijacked by sort of career criminals, if you like. And it's good people within the government that actually leaked the stuff for WikiLeaks and other places, and it's because they were appalled by what they were seeing done in their name, and it's not so it's not really Julian Assange against America. It's actually good people within the American government and forces and diplomatic corps or whatever, who are appalled themselves but scared and are trying to get change, along with activists as well. And that's an important message to come across, to say that there are plenty of people within the organisation who are sickened by what they see and are trying to stop it. But unfortunately, the organisation gets more and more ruthless. You can see what's happened to me, and obviously not anyone's going to follow my example quickly, but as I said, the advantage of being a soldier is that you can't very well say, oh, well, they're going to put me in jail, therefore I'm going to stop. I mean, the whole point of being a soldier is you're prepared to put your life on the line for your government and die if necessary. So the fact that they're going to try and put me in jail, I can't just not do it. because of that, I have to go forward. But I definitely feel like I'm fighting for the country. I'm fighting for the national interests. I don't believe I'm fighting against the country. And I think most of the people, if not all the people that gave documents to WikiLeaks were the same. They were saying our government is being hijacked by the wrong type of people. They're misusing our government resources. And we need to do something about it. And Julian Assange gave those people a platform, but he and gave them a voice. But they already had their own ideas about things going wrong, and they were people who were patriotic members of the government.
Well, here's the thing: liberty is just a concept unless you can express it, unless it's tangible, right?
Yeah.
Like a right is only a nice or quaint idea unless you can test it and prove that you have that right. And the press is only as free as the government is. The society is only as free as the press is. So talk a little bit about what happened to ABC after you started meeting with them, and then they released the Afghan files.
It took a while. I met with them in 2016, and again, I was getting increasingly desperate. I posted I've got a website, and I started to I was doing anything I could to just get interest in the case. As I said, I've seen a couple of well-known journalists, and they seemed interested to begin with, but then I don't know whether the government backgrounded them or got to them or whatever, but they lost interest. And they didn't tell me why, which was suspicious. They didn't say, well, the story's not a go or whatever. They just stopped contact. So possibly the security services got to them or whatever. But then the ABC, I posted something online, which was my complaint document, and it was questionable about whether it was classified or not, because I created it. I posted online, and then the military got upset because they heard about it, or they were monitoring me, I guess. And they told me to take it off, and I did. But the ABC had seen it, and they contacted me, and they said, this looks interesting. We'd like to talk about it. So they came to Canberra, and they talked to me. And I explained to them, I thought there were some serious things going wrong. And they started doing other investigations, and to their credit, and they started talking to other people. I think that was really the beginnings of the Brereton report, even though it hadn't started yet. But good journalists started asking questions, and they weren't obviously going to drop it. So that was good. It took them about a year, and they came back, and they didn't run the case for a year. I felt so strongly about it. While I gave them the documents anonymously, they said, would you be prepared to own the documents and appear on television if necessary? I was still in the military then, so it was quite a risk, but I said yes, I would, because I felt, as I said, this was a life or death issue for me. I felt really strongly about it. I felt that I'd been betrayed by my own country, and we'd become a rotten country, and I felt strongly about it. So I said, even though that almost certainly meant jail, I said, if you need me to own these documents and appear on TV, I will. And so, but then they changed tack on that. I guess they knew they'd probably never get to broadcast. And they published the documents in 2017, I think, called the Afghan Files. And I knew then that I'd be arrested, and eventually, because it would, as I said, it would have been quite easy to trace the documents back to me. You can do electronic searches on who printed the documents when, and it would have been quite clear to work out that I was the common denominator between printing all these documents. I left the country, and I didn't destroy the original documents. I kept them because, again, I always believed that I was doing the right thing, a bit like Ellsberg, I guess, and I kept the documents, even though they were evidence. I kept them in my house, even though they were evidence that linked me to the crime, because I thought if I destroyed the documents, and then years later, the allegations came up against the government, and I would be like, yeah, look, this really happened. If I couldn't produce the documents, I wouldn't really be able to have a leg to stand on. So I kept them, and I left the country, and I kept them in Australia. Eventually, the police did a raid on my house, and they found the documents. And of course, my first reaction was, "Oh my God, why didn't I destroy the documents?" But it was after I calmed down that I thought, well, no, I'm glad you didn't destroy them, because to destroy them, and it makes you look like you're a criminal. You're trying to hide the evidence or whatever, but you think this vindicates you. You think this shows that there is something very wrong in the highest levels of Australian government and the military, right down to the bottom, and you need to own it and be proud of that fact. So they took all the documents. They tried to contact me in Spain. They said, we want to speak to me. Want you to help us with our inquiries, which meant arrest you. And I stayed there for a while, and I was like, well, I was still fighting the fight. I was still trying to find it. I thought maybe I could get journalists. I could write a book about it. And I'd kind of given up any hope of really getting any traction. I thought maybe I could write a book about, what my life as a whistleblower, and how tough it was, and how nobody really listened to me. But and then I decided I had to change. I spoke to my wife at the time, and I was like, well, I'm probably going to. I feel strongly about this, and I don't want to be on the run as a criminal all my life, and I'll go back to Australia and I'll face the charges, because I believe that by facing the charges, it might be the only way that these issues and what I was talking about will actually be brought into the public spotlight, and I'm prepared to do that. So I flew back to Australia actually to see my daughter, who was still in Australia, and as we suspected, I would get arrested when I came in, because I was on like a sort of terrorist watch list, and they pressed the panic button as soon as I came in. They followed me around for a couple of days, and then when I tried to leave, they had kind of arrested me at the end, which is what we expected. And then I was tucked in jail, and luckily they gave me bail. The police were good that way, but they but yes, it took a little bit of. It was always exposing the corruption was always my biggest goal, and so I realised that a trial might be the only way that was going to happen. And my first reaction was to get out of Dodge, because I couldn't do much good in jail. Then the more I thought about it, I thought it'd be better to come back to Australia and face the trial and face the charges and say, this is why I did it. I believe I did the right thing. Try to prove that I didn't. It's my duty as a legal officer and a military officer to stand up when I see the wrong thing done. It's actually part of the Geneva Conventions to say, military officers must report war crimes or similar, wrongdoing by their own forces, by other forces, and wherever they see it. It's actually a positive duty. It's not you may do it, or it's possible. You actually have to do it. It doesn't matter whether it's your own people that have done it. You have to do it. So I felt justified about it, and I still had a certain amount of righteous anger. And I was like, I'm going to plead my case. I'm going to run the case. I'm going to plead not guilty, and I want these issues to be looked at, to say, if you see something wrong, you need to stand up for it. And this is why the government is still fighting me, even though it's illogical. It's come out, it's undoubted from the Brereton report and from the various different TV shows some of which have showed people, being murdered. It looks like being murdered on camera. So it's pretty clear things were going very wrong. and yet the reason they're still trying to put me in jail was, again, shows how big the problem is, and they can't stand the idea that government employees would get away with reporting crime by the government because they just don't want to open the floodgates for other people to come forward. And even though they must realise now that putting me in jail for a long time is going to be quite hard because people are going to say, hang on, he exposed, things going wrong in the government and you're putting him in jail. And yet, but they still want to make it really, really difficult for me in order to deter anyone else getting the same idea, which when you think about it, it's pretty sinister.
Well, even though you already got vindicated by the Barton report, right? I mean, pretty much says all the things you said too.
Yeah, a lot of people say, how come you're still on trial?
So we have a question from the chat, and well, Glory is gone, so I'm going to ask it for. So if you were to have reported everything that could possibly be considered a crime throughout your career, how many crimes that you either witnessed or heard about, something that maybe most soldiers go through, how many crimes did you run across but never or wouldn't report?
Yeah, not many. I mean, I was always kind of a goody two shoes, I guess. I reported everything I saw, and a lot of people in the military do the right thing. I mean, most of the time, soldiers do the right thing. A lot of soldiers I really was proud to serve with. I was in the British Army beforehand in the 80s and 90s, and I didn't witness anything wrong then. There was someone, but there was a soldier in Northern Ireland who murdered. Well, he shot a civilian. It was a case where there was a roadblock and it was just kids in a stolen car, and they drove through the roadblock, and the soldier, in anger more than anything, I guess, he shot at the car as it was driving away, and hit and killed the driver. And even though that's a kind of a natural reaction, you're not meant to do that. If a car's driven through the roadblock and you're not meant to just shoot them dead unless you've got some sort of reason. And a soldier, I think, in that case, said, we thought it was a bomb. We thought the car was a bomb, and we were trying to stop it blowing up. It turned out that was all a lie, and he got exposed for that. They didn't think it was a bomb. They were just angry that someone drove through the car. Now that was about as big as a crime and that wasn't in my unit. That was considered quite a big deal. That guy went to jail and he was eventually let out because people had sympathy for him. That he was scared and angry. But that was, in my day, that was kind of a big thing. And so when I first went to Afghanistan, while I saw what I saw was wrong, was mainly with the leadership and mainly with the politicians. We were saying it wasn't necessarily sexy and it was hard to get across that, but we were saying we were winning the war when we weren't. We were saying we weren't killing civilians with bombs when we were. We were saying that the people that we were supporting weren't corrupt when we knew that they were. For example, we knew that the poppy fields were sort of being regrown, and the Taliban had actually destroyed all the poppy fields, which was a terrible irony that we were sort of more encouraging of illegal conduct than the Taliban were. They actually eradicated the poppies, even though because it was a public message and we needed to demonise the Taliban. We put out stories to say that they didn't really destroy the poppies, but actually they did. And we started regrowing the poppies because people that grew the heroin poppies gave us money, and it was like, so we increasingly did the wrong thing and pretended we did the right thing, and that was my focus, not so much on soldiers killing civilians, because that I didn't until 2013. I hadn't actually seen that. the problems I saw and the things I picked up on were actually with the politicians putting out false statements, and with the leadership fudging the truth about things, rather than the individual soldiers doing the wrong thing. And yet I always reported, crimes, or tried to complain as much as I could. At first, if something wasn't clear whether it was a crime or not, I would just, I'd get suspicious, I'd think about it, and I'd try to move on. But eventually, I started to see things that weren't, that were clearly wrong. One of the problems you get is sometimes something is wrong, but it's not necessarily a big deal. People can say, "Oh, yeah, so what? Well, I broke the law. I stole a little bit of money or whatever." But it's not very much. What are you going to do about it? And that was one of the problems, and that was I had, and that I did think it was a big deal when we broke the law in small ways, and maybe people thought I was a pain in the arse. But here I was the guy saying, "Hang on, the law says this, the procedure says that. We've done something else." And the more I looked into it, because it showed me that the organisation, while we pretended to do the right thing, we didn't. And that's one of the reasons why I have a lot of sympathy for the soldiers on trial, even the ones that killed civilians, because the generals and the politicians didn't follow the law. If there were two stories to tell, and one of them was a lie and one of them was the truth, they were just as likely to put out the false one as the lie. And when you think about it, soldiers killing civilians is really just them not following the law and doing cruel things for their own self-advancement. And the politicians were also doing that. And the generals were also doing that. In fact, they were doing it all the time. Soldiers occasionally broke the law. Politicians, they never even cared about following the law. It was all about, as long as the public perception was good, the law really never came into it. The only time the law came into it for politicians was if the media found out and they had to panic and they had to kind of do some sort of a damage control. But this is one of the things that upset me as a military lawyer. You could write the strongest opinion possible to say this is illegal, we can't do that, and they would just totally ignore it. And as long as the public relations people thought it was a good idea, that's what happened. We were ruled by public relations rather than law. And the only reason, we'd say things like, "Oh, we love the law, we do the right thing," or whatever, but we were just saying that in the same way that an oil company might say, "Oh, we love the environment," put out ads about how much they're fixing the rainforest. It's just a gambit to win public opinion. They were obviously the biggest crimes in Afghanistan were not committed by soldiers; they were committed by generals and politicians.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's it.
Yeah. It is the soldiers wear the uniform, but they essentially make the decisions, right? And let me see. I'm going to just through all the things you mentioned.
In relation to the last point, this is one of my key things to say. If soldiers, they kill someone in a village or whatever, that's bad. But if we don't sort out the information wars, where false information is used to start wars and false narratives are put out there, we're going to be in another war with China or something in the future, and that's the bigger problem. That is the sort of thing that it will kill thousands, hundreds of thousands, and that's why I focus on it, because that is a big problem, and it's a problem that affects the future, not just the past.
You actually give the perfect lead. Now I was waiting for that lead, because you said one of the tough things about being a whistleblower is that the mainstream media are not interested in anything that shakes the world. because they are corporate entities themselves.
Yeah.
Now, what I noticed, and this is kind of strange, like it is not even so much that they censor everything. The moment that like one of these corporate media starts writing about it, they all jump on it for clickbait, right? They all jump on it. They want to quickly advertise it, make some money with the advertisements, and then it dies down again, and they will never mention it again. Like, even with the whole, this is a weird example maybe, but the whole Jeffrey Epstein situation, when Jeffrey Epstein got arrested and later died in prison. Even though like there were all these elites involved, and we all knew about that, and we were talking about all of that, the media did cover it temporarily for a clickbait. Like they knew it would get a lot of visitors, and that made them go on it. Like that convinced them to do it, I think, personally. But the second after that, it dies down when it is no longer, it is like the
It's
trending
a good
thing.
point. No, I never thought of it as clickbait, but I guess that's why, and maybe that makes a difference. Now, the Epstein example is a really good one because, yeah, there was quite a lot of publicity, and then when he died, however he actually died, it was funny how, well, not funny, apparently it was a directive that the media were to drop it, you know. The conspiracy theories were not to be entered into, and no one was there to talk about it again. And obviously there's a little bit of coverage, but basically there was no coverage on whether he really died, whether he really committed suicide or whether he was murdered. He would just shut down, and within like a day. And that was kind of interesting. That can't have been a kind of coincidence. As you said, yeah, clickbait was good, but they didn't really want to look into it's sort of the big pictures. Was he a Mossad agent, you know, gathering blackmail information on key figures, things that, you know, big issues. Not that was necessarily true, but just to consider those questions. They were never looked at, you know, that's a bit like in my case. Yeah, there is some interest, and I am riding the tiger a bit with media. Some corporate media has given me a very good run, which is good, but it's limited. It's not really into looking at the wider issues, because I guess that reflects back on them. Governments are used to be big advertisers in the newspapers, so they don't want to upset the government. They will, if you can attack an unpopular member of the military, they might join in. But you're right, you've got to pick your targets, because they're not really interested in shaking the big machine, so there's no point going there. And not surprisingly, I can see both sides, because they're corporate media and they're companies that, you know, if you ask the chairman what they're point of, they're there to make money, and you can't necessarily blame them for making money. I mean, they'd say, well, that's what we're here for. But yeah, they won't necessarily. And it's interesting to probably go back and look at the sort of Pentagon Papers and Watergate, and to see what kind of motivated why those sort of stories got over the line and others didn't. The Brereton Inquiry got a very good run, but interestingly enough, and this will probably happen in the States, you get the progressive papers and you get the conservative papers, and the progressive papers gave the Brereton Inquiry a very good run, and even the conservative papers to begin with. And then there was a pushback from the conservative papers to say, oh, what about natural justice, and you know, maybe we're being a bit too harsh for our against our soldiers on the front line, and so there began to be a little bit of a fight from the two sides about how we treat war crimes, and even there was one, the sort of progressive newspaper that ran a kind of campaign against a particular very famous soldier, they were rubbished by the conservative newspaper. The situations are sort of complex, and I'm in the middle somewhere. While the progressive story against this particular soldier was a very strong story, there's no doubt about it. The evidence against this guy is very strong. But saying there was something bad about it in that it looked like the government had leaked all this information, which is annoying for me because they're putting me on trial for leaking, and they're doing their own leaking at exactly the same time. So it's extremely hypocritical. And it looks like the reason that they leaked documents about this famous soldier was because they were trying to discredit the soldier in order to take the heat off themselves, which was a successful strategy. But again, it's a sort of media war strategy, when what you see in the media may even be true, but it's been put there to make you think a certain thing and to push you in a certain direction, and the overall direction you're being pushed in may not necessarily be the right one. So I thought that leaking by the government was wrong, but then again, I also thought the Conservatives started pushing the idea that until someone was being convicted in a court of law, that nothing had happened. But there were situations where there was GoPro footage, as I said, of someone being shot. It's very black and white. It's in colour, in fact, but it's clear what's happened. Mm. And so it's wrong to say, oh, well, no one's been convicted in a court of law, so therefore nothing's happened. I mean, that was pretty clear, and you could have, under our existing legal systems, you could throw that person out of the defence force. You wouldn't have to say, oh, well, you need to go and have a trial by jury in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, and in the meantime, nobody can say anything against you. If you're caught on video shooting someone in the head, something has happened. And so I disagreed with the Conservative line to say, oh, well, everyone's innocent until proven guilty. Let's not be too hasty. I mean, it had gone past that point, let's just say.
Yeah, well,
there's not a lot of nuance in an execution.
No. But there's a reason why.
No, not really.
There's a reason why I was asking it, David. That is the whole clickbait thing. There's a reason why I was asking it. That is like, there's this argument.
Distracted.
In a way, yeah. But is it like, is the power center still with the government? Like when I said like, okay, with the Epstein case, suddenly all the corporate media did wrong with it because it delivers them money. Now we're talking about who is going to war and who benefits from this war, right? And when the Americans go to war, for example, those who benefit are the companies behind it, Lockheed Martin, Boeing. They benefit from this, and they are actually corporate entities. And now I can quickly throw in this example of Twitter banning the president, Donald Trump, back then. Is the power really with the government, or are these corporate entities behind it? And that when they make the amount of money from clickbait, they were on with it temporarily.
Oh yeah, you're right. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's the corporate people have the power. It sounds, I hesitate to say it because it sounds a bit conspiracy theorist, but I mean, and it's good when you mention the actual names, like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Halliburton. Yeah. They're real companies. It's not make-believe. They're real companies, and the whole war in Afghanistan was like this. It's a way to turn public money into private money. So when you and often this is what middle of the road people like myself used to. You think, well, the war can't be a bad thing. The government wouldn't spend, so many $1 billion on it if it was a bad thing or whatever there must be. But what happens is that you pay someone to build a base in Afghanistan or an airfield or whatever, and you use taxpayer money to do that. And there was a company called DynCorp or Halliburton or one. It doesn't really matter who it was. It's one big American company. And then that company is so happy for this $50 million contract to build an airfield and it probably only actually cost them $20 million to build it, and they pocket the other $30. but then they give you, as the local congressman or president or whatever, they give you $2 million for your next campaign. And this is what happens 100 times over. So if you do the right thing by Lockheed Martin or whatever, you will get a lot of campaign donations, and then you will stay in power, and then you'll get more campaign donations. And so you end up getting by spending taxpayer money on certain things, you could end up getting you can funnel funds your own way by people being grateful. These corporations being grateful for the money that you've spent on them, and it's big amounts. And yes, the corporate media are corporates, and they're in bed with they're Halliburton, all these companies, Lockheed Martin, they all advertise with them, and it's all part of it. And they can hardly really. It's not easy for corporate media to go against corporations. And you're right, the clickbait is. I have to work out how to get more clickbait. They will run certain stories. As I said, I've been very grateful, and I can't knock it because I have had a pretty good run of it, in the media. But you're right, they focus on certain things, and they probably have their reasons to do that. And they focus. If you're lucky, I was lucky in one of the lucky things that came out of the Bergen report. And again, it's funny because you have to take your victories where you get them. And even though it wasn't really very fair or very legal, what happened was the chief of the Australian Army said, the Bergen report is terrible. It's exposed all these war crimes. And the Special Forces had got everyone in the Special Forces basically had got a medal for being so wonderful at that time in Afghanistan. So the chief of the military said, I'm going to have to take that medal away because, you're obviously not that wonderful. And it wasn't actually such a bad decision, but there was a huge furor in the paper. And I don't know whether it was generated by bots or whatever, but there was all sorts of angry people saying, how dare you take this general medal away? And it was one of the first times I was quite happy that the politician, the Prime Minister, actually broke step with the head of the military. And he kind of told the military off, and he said, you're going to reverse that decision because he was only doing it for popular opinion, because there was a big campaign in the newspaper, and he thought I might lose some votes on this. So he told the military, and that was quite good for me because it started to show that there were cracks. It was very hard for me to fight a combined political military, junta. But once they start turning on each other, that's obviously quite a good thing. They're probably going to change tactics now they've heard the podcast. But that was a step in the right direction for me to say that the corporate media and the politicians might cut certain individuals' leadership loose if they think that they've become unpopular or they've made a mistake, and that's quite good for me to be able to. If I can at least get some people who are in the establishment but are considered fair game by the corporate media, that may be an in where I can get some publicity. You're certainly not going to get any traction sort of saying the whole system is wrong, but if you can show that particular people have broken the law, and that they're not going to be defended, I guess that's the best way to haul yourself up. But yeah, you're right. Try to work out what it is. I mean, I have to play the information game now just as much as anybody else, and to work out what's going to be of interest and what's not is part of my process as well. And that's I've been lucky. I have had corporate media, play. One of the things I'm worried about, and we talked about it before, Gloria talked about it, is getting smeared right during the trial. Some sort of big smear campaign against me, and what little support I have could be whittled away. At the moment, it's quite good, and I got raised over $100,000, and a lot of people wishing me well, but it could be gone overnight with a sophisticated campaign against me. Luckily, a lot of my supporters will be pretty outrageous. A lot of people can see that I'm a pretty middle of the road, middle middle class, middle-aged guy, and who and the war crimes and things were nothing to do with me. I was just trying to report what I saw. And so hopefully they won't be able to just smear me personally, but it's not impossible. And then I would kind of lose most of the corporate media support, and then it would probably be quite easy to put me in jail. There was one guy who got put in jail who was a military guy. They just call him Witness J. No one even knows his name. He ended up working for the security services, but he obviously didn't have any support. He didn't have any media, and he got put in jail under an assumed name with a secret trial. And that's what could happen to you if you don't have any kind of media support. You can just get forgotten. Your situation is no better than being in China. You can be locked away and no one can even know, and they can have suppression orders on the case. And even when this guy went to jail, the head of the jail didn't even know that he was actually a former security service person that had fallen out. It's pretty scary, and that's why media is important, and that's why I guess I get a bit nervous with haters or whatever, because if you do lose popular support, maybe completely unfairly, but your chances of spending a life in jail are very strong. And as you said, it depends a lot on it. If I had endless money, I'd be spending it not on lawyers but on media consultants. Thanks. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point to bring up. Like, one of the major things that we do have to fight with the movement to free Assange is just fighting back against a constant and very pressing and pervasive just wall of smears at his character that are designed to really discourage people from getting involved in the case. So media is very important, and it's very much in Western society kind of an arm of the empire when it comes to kind of touching back on what we were discussing earlier with manufacturing consent to go to these wars, and then with smearing people who expose the truth behind them. Luckily they haven't gotten after you yet, and hopefully they won't, even though I guess the one positive you could take away from that is it would be a good thing that you have the right people mad at you, but at the same time, it makes the fight that much harder to have to go against this massive propaganda machine.
Oh yeah, look, it's hard, and that's right. I take my hat off to you because it is really hard, and you're doing well, as I said. But I really. It sounds like I'm blowing my own trumpet, but I really do think we are the modern band of brothers. It's hard, and you do have we're like stuck there in Bastogne getting bombed through the winter. It's very hard when you've got trying to convince people that actually the real crimes were what is exposed by Julian Assange, and his hairdo or whatever is really not relevant. And the guy was very brave, and he did a huge service to the future of the world. And but yeah, trying to get that across is not easy, and trying to get smeared, and then you get smeared yourself, because you're a supporter. It is a hard road, and it would be very hard for me. I mean, I'm not really afraid of going to jail, and I do. But the perception thing is hard. If people know I went to jail because I stood up to the government, and I believe what I saw was wrong. If people know that generally, I can handle that. As I said, I'm a bit nuts that way, and I believe in it. But yeah, if your message gets distorted, and people can, that I was put in jail and they managed to paint me as some sort of evil criminal who did something terrible. I mean, that would really eat me up, because you need people to at least know what you're standing. And that's why I'm so grateful to your listeners and your followers. As long as people know what I stand for and what I'm about, I can hold my head up high, and I can, I can take whatever's coming to me. I'm not trying to run the case on any kind of fancy footwork. I'm not trying to say that I've got, mental issues. And one of the reasons, I'm quite clear with my lawyers, I will never plead guilty on mental health grounds or whatever. I knew what I was doing. I was quite sure of what I was doing. And if I'm judged fairly, I'm happy with that. But a smear campaign can kind of get to you. I mean, I've got 2 children, and like anyone, that's the sort of thing that can really get through to you. And the idea that they could poison my children's minds against me and paint me as some sort of bad person, that obviously scares me. And knowing what I know about the government, I know that nothing is off the table. When you give a security service a job to do, they do it. They don't kind of there's no one there to say, "Oh, we can't really do that." I mean, if they putting out a false story would mean that I would end up killing myself and my children might kill themselves, the security services in Australia would still do it. They don't, and in America, obviously, they play very dirty. And it just reminds me of why I'm doing what I'm doing. We have lost track of who we are and who we're meant to be. We run people down, and there's no one there to say, there's no adult supervision. You'd think there'd be somebody in the Australian American government who'd say, look, hang on, David McBride, you might not like him, he might be a bit nuts, whatever, but he's hardly Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. He's not trying to blow the place up. He never leaked documents to anybody else. He's not the sort of person we have to, do something terrible to his children because there isn't any adult supervision. They treat me the same way they treat a terrorist who's trying to blow up the harbour bridge. And that means smear campaigns, that means money for social media, right? They background journalists against me. There is nothing they won't do, and that's really sad. But again, when I think about that, it makes me more fired up and think I'm going to fight these guys because we have become pretty bad. It hurts me when I think that my children might never know. That they might start thinking I'm a bad person or whatever, and they might never find out the truth because it's relatively complex. And again, that's why I'm grateful for people like you who listen and your listeners, because you're smart enough to kind of understand the complexities and the wheels within wheels and false statements. And so I can talk to you without fear. But, my children are 13 and 15. They might not really understand. And a strong smear campaign could make them, hate me for the rest of my life. So who knows? So I do worry about that, and I guess our enemies realise that if you can take away, what they call centre of gravity, if you can take away what a person stands for, you could destroy their credibility, and that's very important. Symbolism is very important. In a case like Nelson Mandela. The South Africans put him in jail, and they said he was, he was a dangerous terrorist blowing up things. But the rest of the world didn't buy that, luckily, and they were, he was seen as an anti-apartheid campaigner. And those two competing narratives kind of fought their way up for 20 years, or whatever. And then eventually he was kind of, released because people could say he's an anti-apartheid campaigner, and you can't keep him in jail for that. But yeah, the people will try and put out a narrative, and it's in my case to say, oh, he's a dangerous person who leaked government secrets and damaged our national security, and I need to counter that and say, no, he's someone that stood up for what is right and exposed wrongdoing. I didn't damage national security. Nothing damages national security more than a corrupt government. But trying to get that message across is not always easy. A lot of people, even people like, this is how bad it is, people I knew and grew up with, they shun me because they think that I'm a leaker of government secrets. It's like, really? But it's funny how people's perceptions is important. That can be shaped sometimes by subtle twinges in newspaper articles or whatever, but some people can decide that somehow you're a bad person. Maybe it's because they've got secrets behind themselves and they don't want anyone leaking them. But yeah, perception is important, and we need to fight that media image. And it's something you're the generation, Glory, where you can really work on this. It's kind of and someone else I work with. How to make doing the right thing sexy, I guess. Got a conservatives, people like dropping bombs and it's like Top Gun or whatever, and that's. But we need to kind of make doing the right thing or ethics or whatever. Somehow that needs to be made where people think it's a kind of a cool thing to do, and it obviously. Some people do think that, but when more people expose the government lies and government crimes is not a bad thing. It's actually kind of a good thing, and working out how to get that into people's minds. There is something to be proud of by doing the right thing, because unfortunately the war seems to win elections, and it's obviously taps into something deep within people's psyche, and so a leaker against the government is seen like some sort of a traitor, and trying to turn that around to say actually if someone stands up to government bullying, government law breaking, they're actually they're the hero, they're not the villain of the case. But try to work that perception. It's hard. It's your generation. It's your job. I'm going to hand that to you. You can report back to me.
We've kind of like walked up against a number of times how narratives in corporate media get managed, and you've even mentioned Halliburton and a couple of other companies, and the thing that we haven't said out loud yet is that these corporations have a public-private partnership with the government. And when their advertising dollars go to set a narrative, it is, at least in the case of the U.S. government, the U.S. government's official narrative, and in U.S. establishment media, corporate media, they cut out the middleman to where they don't have a reporter Ken Delaney style, because there is a traditionalist aspect to some of this where you have the reporters slip in the official narrative into their reporting, but in many cases the network will just hire the former CIA director as he's walking out of the office, or the former national security director as they're walking out of the office, and they deliver the official narrative as an expert.
Yeah, that's very worrying. That happens here. It's not as bad here as it is in the US, but yeah, that makes my blood boil when I see all these people who used to work for the administration and now got a suit on it, and they're saying, "Oh, I think the administration's doing the right thing here," and and yeah, it's maddening. And I guess again, we can stop that by trying to enforce the small things. There are laws against. Revolving doors and going to work for the sort of military-industrial complex straight after you leave the military, and yet they're never enforced, and no one ever does anything about it. But you shouldn't be able to kind of give a self-serving opinion on a talk show which is related to something that you did 6 months ago when you had a uniform on. But they do, and to try to enforce it. That's why I'm excited by. We need to get our own media channel. We need to get our own. We need to get smart, I guess, and stop complaining. And I guess that's one of, after I win my case, that's my next thing, is to try to get our own equivalent, because we know it. You guys have got the smarts to do it, and we could actually put up similar sort of things, alternatives, people like me speaking, people like you speaking, and actually start putting that alternative view out and getting it online. It would start small, but people, and I think people would pay for it as well, and it's a small subscription fee. We've seen the boom of Netflix. People don't mind paying for things if they're good. and we can make it entertaining. That's why you're good. You make people laugh, and it's. I reckon that's the way to go. We have to start getting our own talk shows of our own panels, and people. If you've got interesting things to say, people will tune in. They don't necessarily have to agree, and we can slowly start, putting an alternative line out there. So if you guys got any connections or whatever, I'm interested in trying to do more podcasts and talks, and starting to do our own alternative media, I guess, to combat that, because I think maybe there is a chance that in the future people will cotton on to the fact that they're being sold a line by people who are trying to sell you something, and maybe that's the way we attack it, to say it's all very well people talking up a war, but it's like car salesmen trying to talk up a car. They're trying to sell you. I mean, the people that lose from the war is the average Joe who has to go and fight it, or who gets hit by a bomb as a result of the mess we've made. And we need to work, and also the tax, and we all pay through our tax, masses and masses of tax dollars, which it's okay if it benefits the politicians because it ends up in donations in their pockets, but we lose it ourselves, and to try to attack it that way and say, don't, when they're talking you into a war, they're trying to sell you a product, and they're selling you a product that you're going to have to pay for. It doesn't come for free. You're going to have to pay for it in terrorists coming back to our country, and your sons and daughters going to fight, and also the brand, the American brand, is going to be damaged, and that's going to cause problems. And there is a cost for these things. It's all very well to say, oh yes, regime change is probably about time, and talk about it like they do. But yeah, we need to kind of show that there is a cost. And they're salesmen, and of course they're not going to talk about the downside, because they're actually trying to sell something.
Yeah, well, the sale already starts when before you go to war, right? Because the build up of this military industrial complex, that goes like every year. Like in America, for example, you have 800 billion a year in budget. But that is like you said before, it is public money going into the hands of a few private companies. You're moving money. Tax money, and that is already the product. They create the missiles and the bullets, and the more of these things are fired, the more money they make. More is being sold to the public government, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, it's a big deal, and now and in this whistleblower book that I've read, again, Crisis of Conscience, I really recommend it. And it's actually not boring. You think a book about whistleblowers is going to be boring, but it's not. It's a page turner. In fact, there's a really good quote on the back. It says, I don't smoke, but I was tempted to take up smoking reading this book, because it does kind of like you go, oh God, what's going to happen next as you turn the page. And but it deals with, it says that there's it's not the military industrial complex, it's the military industrial congressional complex. And the idea that, these companies like Boeing and Lockheed Martin, I think it was Lockheed Martin, it was kind of bankrupt, you're going to go out of business, but they were able to say to the congressmen, we've got a factory in your district, and if it goes under, you're suddenly going to have 5,000, 10,000 angry unemployed people, and you're going to lose your seat, so you better do something good for us so our company doesn't go under. And I was involved in politics, but I've done a lot of different things, and I know how it works. And that all you care about in politics, whether you're red or blue, is you need to get elected. And if someone says something like that to you, it has a huge effect. You don't want unemployed, and you need to keep the factories going, and that's the sort of thing that gets through to people, and it's very, very dangerous. And so they say, shit, we need and it even happens in Australia, and it's happened recently where in some kind of crazy decision in order to defend Australia. And this is good, because the conservative newspapers are on my side in this one. It's great, because if you hit pocket, I tried to explain it. I spent years trying to make whistleblowing sexy or whatever, try to get people to care. And one of the tax thing was something I focused on, but to say, in Australia, we're spending pretty much all the money we have on buying something like 6 or 9 submarines. It's like, it's actually an enormous amount of money. They won't be ready until 2050, and some won't be ready to 2057. It's kind of a crazy decision to think that a huge desert country is going to protect itself with submarines, but it's happened. But even people who criticise the decision are sort of saying, well, as long as jobs come to Australia, come into my electorate to help build these submarines, it won't be such a bad decision. And you see then we get a connection between, is the military meant to be creating jobs for people? Is that the purpose of the military, or is it actually meant to be protecting the country in the best way possible? And you get this disconnect even with people who are kind of supporters. They think, oh well, as long as building all these obsolete, ridiculous submarines at the cost of 200,000 billion or whatever, it brings us some jobs into this electorate. It's a good thing, but of course it's not really a good thing, because it's military spending it inevitably leads to wars. If you've got military, they will eventually be used. Someone pointed that out, Eugene Debs or whatever. But you don't build a military for nothing, and then it's a dangerous thing to try to prop up governments and win elections by doing military spending in order to create jobs and make people happy. Unfortunately, that's what happens, and people need to look at it and say, it's great to have jobs, but if we do it at the expense of creating wars, it's a really bad thing. And if we're the sort of country that thinks having employment is more important than ethics and what we stand for, well, we actually have become a bad country. We're no longer a good country, and we're trying to get that message across to people is hard. But yeah, sometimes some of the good whistleblower stories were against companies like Lockheed Martin, when they were actually able to expose that even if these jets and bombers and things that we were building were a good idea, the fact that we were paying $750 for a screwdriver, which was just a screwdriver, but the companies were just having this huge markup and ripping off the government and ripping off the taxpayers. And it was really these people that were claiming to be defending us and all about advertising were actually really just seeing it as a trough of money to be got any way they could, and they would just charge us crazy amounts for everything they supplied. That's quite a good way to attack it. I mean, you have to they have lateral thinkings, and if you can expose the fact that, well, rather than trying to expose the military-industrial complex, but to sort of say, this is wrong, that someone who ordered this plane got a kickback of $100 million or something for ordering the plane, that's obviously corruption. And someone, we're paying $750 for screwdrivers worth $5 times 1,000, 2,000, a million. That brings it home to people to say, this is not about defending America or defending Australia. We are being conned. We're being conned by people who are wrapping themselves in American flags, but underneath they're really just out to con us for their money. And there are different ways to attack it and to say, that's one of the things I've been trying to say, don't be fooled. One of the funny things, and this is one of the reasons it's hard to get, I was trying to get legal firms to sponsor me, and there was to run my case, and I went and saw some people from a very big law firm, multinational law firm, and they were quite interested. They said, they could tell that obviously you're a good person, you've done the right thing, etc. But at the end of the day, they couldn't work for me because they had a conflict of interest. So they said, because one of their clients was a firm that supplied security services to the military, and they would be offended if the company was supporting someone like that. And it reminded me of how everything's tied to each other like a spider's web, because while they have all these very expensive security services, systems in the military, they have iris recognition and they have hand recognition, and they have a lot of background checks or whatever. It really wasn't very hard for me to walk out with masses of classified documents, and it embarrasses the people that have charged the government millions and millions and millions of dollars for these so-called top-of-the-line security systems, which aren't top of the line at all, but they don't work, and that's kind of embarrassing for these contractors, and that is routinely the case with government contractors. They paint themselves as patriots, but often the stuff that they supply is extremely shoddy, and it doesn't protect the country. It's all just shonky snake oil salesmen selling things that don't even work very well, but they manage to sell it to the government because they bribe various people in the government. But so much of our military equipment doesn't work very well, and the people that have to suffer are the soldiers on the front line. And this is one of the things that bothered me. We don't really care about the soldiers. We pretend we do, but we don't really care whether they have the right equipment or the right backup, and we're certainly happy to sacrifice them in political situations. Should the media narrative ever turn against them, we never stand by our own people, even if they're doing exactly what they've been told to do. And so that's one of my big bugbears. It's the shonkiness of so much in the war machine, in that we don't even run the war properly. It's kind of everything about it, from the catering, from the money. So there are so many snouts and troughs of money going out, and it's a bonanza for unscrupulous people, and that is maybe that's something that will get through to middle class voters, to say you think we're kind of fighting the bad guys, but really we're just financing the fat cats most of the time when we do, and that's why the wars don't end, because they don't necessarily want them to end. It's too much of a money spinner, and and that's got to be wrong. If you believe in a country, if you believe in doing the right thing, and it's not really that the patriot is the person that says, look, no, that's not right. The patriot's not the person that says, more bombs, more money spent on this or that is the right thing. And again, I know Glory's going to work out a way to sell that to people, but we haven't known. She's so smart. And
No pressure, Jones. No pressure.
Yeah.
It's
There's
a
not
good
enough
thing.
pressure on Zoomers already.
It's a good thing Glory is not an overcommitted, anxiety-ridden college student.
She's got to save the world as well as passing her midterm exam.
Oh my goodness.
Responsibility for saving the world put on top. That's fucking no. It's insane to me that we don't. Hey, we were talking about this earlier today. That with all the evidence, for one, that we don't have a stronger anti-war movement, and I internationally, because it's not like finding out about war crimes is a brand new thing, or bullshit justifications for going to war and putting people in a condition where they're under stress and sleep deprived and fucking scared shitless, and then act on that in violent, gross, and idiotic fashion, sometimes, and then sometimes don't. I've had a number of conversations with combat veterans over the year. I've spent a lot of my adult life doing volunteer work for various veterans organizations, just because there's rarely an opportunity that U.S. combat veterans talk to civilians. It just doesn't happen in their day-to-day lives. They come home and they isolate, and when they do talk to people, they talk to other combat vets, and that's just how that shit goes. Or they become a cop.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, well, that's right, and that's why I know I keep saying it, but it's true. You guys do a vital role, and I'm happy to talk to you. Because you kind of get it. You have enough experience, but that's important because once they open up, they will tell you all the same sort of things I would tell you. And this is one of the things I got angry about. If you send 100,000 troops to a poor country like Afghanistan and they don't really know what they're doing, bad things are going to happen. And it's all very well then going, well, this is terrible. I can't believe it. And the politicians going, washing their hands of it. But that was obvious before we sent the troops there. And if you weren't prepared for war crimes to happen, you can't send 100,000 poorly educated, poorly supported people to a war zone. I mean, you can, if you're prepared for that to happen, that's fine. Obviously there were terrible things happen in the Second World War, but it was considered that the goal was clear. And that's the problems with these political wars, is they want it both ways. They want to win votes for dropping bombs and looking strong and looking presidential by getting an F-15 and drop a bomb at supersonic speed, but they don't want the responsibility to say, well, something went wrong, and they don't want to front the cameras and say, well, this particular operation, we dropped the bomb on the hospital, or unfortunately, at a particular base, soldiers got out of hand and they killed some civilians. They don't want to take responsibility for the logical things that are going to happen in a war. And what really made me angry was we just started lying about it. In the Syrian bombing campaign against ISIS, we said something like, and this particularly made me angry because obviously a lot of military lawyers were involved in this. We said, I think I touched on it last week, but we said we killed almost no civilians, something like 8, something ridiculous, and we dropped like billions of dollars worth of bombs, literally more than we had in Vietnam or something, and that's impossible for us to have only killed 8 civilians. But we just made that up. We just changed the definition of civilian, and because no one wanted to say, well, we're fighting a really difficult enemy here, and we have to go pretty hard, and we did kill civilians. They want it both ways. They want to have a war which gives them some sort of like boost in popularity, but they're not prepared to actually say, yeah, well, this is a side effect of what happened. We think it's necessary. Because they're just too focused. When you're running a war simply for popular opinion, rather than actually achieving something worthwhile for the world in the future, you would just have to only focus on popular things, and you just try to deny anything going wrong, because that's the problem you get when being liked is your only aim, rather than actually achieving anything. And it sounds sort of intellectual and esoteric, but it has a real effect. You guarantee war crimes when you're only in a place for show, because you've got soldiers that don't really have a clear idea of what they're doing, and as long as the pictures coming back are positive, what they do in their spare time is not really anyone's interested, and that's and I think it comes from the top, cynicism in leaders, and the idea that we wanted to go to war in Iraq, which has clearly been shown now, that just because it was in our long-term interest, that encouraged soldiers just to shoot anybody that they saw, because they thought, well, oh, fuck, our leaders just want us to be here, and they really just want us to smash the place up. So let's give them let's do what they want, because they're not really in it for the right reasons. It's not really about ethics and accountability, and no one's going to come no one's going to look too hard at anything if we say we killed a whole lot of insurgents. In fact, we compounded it in Australia because part of the whole corporate media playbook, I guess, is if you've got an issue with somebody, the best way to get around it is to make that person a hero, and rather than investigate them, but we give out awards to people who are under clouds, and then that suddenly changes the narrative, and no one wants to bring down a hero. So we in the most cynical fashion, we often we put out possible media fires by giving undeserved awards to people in order to make them, make sure no one could ever question them. And then eventually we'd find some sort of scapegoats who might not have done anything that much wrong in the grand scheme of things, but because we need some villains, we create some villains, and we make a big deal of putting them in jail. And if you're a lawyer like myself, that really stuck in my throat to say, we're not following the law. We're chucking people in jail who don't deserve to be in jail, and we are lionising people who do deserve to be in jail. And that's what happens when you run a war purely on approval grounds, and ethics are off the table. And that's unfortunately where we're kind of going.
But you, as a lawyer, understand the importance of words, right? And the fact that, like you're saying, they're changing the definition of the word civilian. They're also changing the definition of the word torture, right? And they call this advanced interrogation methods, which is an expensive word for torture.
I could see there were problems in the Australian military. That was back in 2004 when we had an Australian guy who was a lawyer like myself, who was based in Abu Ghraib. It would have been. It was considered a prestigious job to go and work in the Americans, with their special forces and with the CIA in this prison, and the reports of atrocities came out, and this bloke came back to Australia, and he'd said he'd followed the party line, and he said, it wasn't torture, it was advanced interrogation techniques, or enhanced interrogation techniques. And you know what? They didn't. It wasn't the end of his career. He got promoted. That's what I said. When they've got a liability, the old playbook, promote him and pretend he did a great job. Well, he did do a great job, and that started to worry me, to say what sort of an organisation it would become when someone gets kind of exposed for doing the wrong thing, instead of getting chucked out, they get pushed up the chain, and that was worrying. He was one of my bosses, the guy who said everything was fine in Abu Ghraib. And you kind of thought, wow, that was one of the sort of telltale signs when I began to think, where are we going? Even when something like that was exposed, there was and they made a big fuss about it. This is a bit like the Broden inquiry. A big fuss was made temporarily. Oh my God, this is really terrible. What they did was they punished, they had big trials of those two very low down people, Lindy England and the Corporal Grainer. They both got put in jail. They made them scapegoat, but they were obviously doing what they were told. I mean, there were people taking photos. It wasn't as if that these two were just on their own. That was obviously the idea of the prison, was to make life very, very difficult and humiliate everyone in there. And so the idea that you could just punish the two corporals was just ridiculous. It was obviously known within the prison, and if it wasn't known, you needed to punish the people in charge, because if they were so out of touch of what was going on in their own prison, I mean, that's of an offence in itself. But none of the senior people really got punished, and only the junior people got punished. They made a really big fuss about it in the press, but eventually it got to die away. And the lessons weren't really learned. Well, the bad. I worry a bit. A lot of people obviously worry the Brereton inquiry is going to be the same. If they punish anybody at all, it'll be a couple of people way down the chain, and no one will ever look at the fact that, well, hang on, how did these people get medals after medal after medal? We have drones over the area. We have spies in the area taking statements from Afghans. We had a lot of complaints from the Afghans at the time. We even had things that were really suspicious, like the kill rate suddenly went up in 2012. We killed a lot more Afghans than we did in, say, 2010, 2008. And yet it was with the same amount of troops on the ground, the same amount of missions going on, the same amount of ammunition being spent, and yet the kill rate, whatever, doubled. And it's obvious that something is going on then. We're suddenly managing to kill Afghans with the same amount of bullets, and we're killing 200 instead of 20. And you'd say, well, it looks like we're just shooting people in dark rooms or something, because that's impossible. That we would suddenly be killing 10, exaggerated, but 10 times the amount of people with the same amount of mission and the same amount of ammunition being expended. It looks like executions. And but no, so people obviously knew, and the idea that they're going to punish a few people, if that might take another 10 years, they're going to draw it out, and no one in the senior leadership is going to get punished. That's a real problem. That's the sort of thing, because it's not about the last war so much. It's about the next war. It's about, we need to stop this false information. We need to stop military being used to win elections. And we need to make sure that if we say what's going on, it's true. And we can't just allow people to front the cameras with all sorts of so-called good news, which is false, and avoid fronting the cameras to say this went wrong, this went wrong. And so it's the whole systemic problems of these sort of public affairs wars that worries me, rather than the individual things that may have gone wrong. And the idea that scapegoats take the blame for things that people higher up the chain. They don't necessarily have to put them in jail. I mean, I think that would go a long way. If we put one general in jail, or even put them on trial, that would have a huge effect to say to others, don't think just because you're up the chain or just because you're a politician that you're going to get away. I mean, it was good in England. They had the Chilcot inquiry that put a lot of pressure on Tony Blair after the Iraq War of 2003. That was a good thing, but it was a shame that they never managed to pin anything on him. It's a shame that George W. Bush is wandering around and free and happy like he's some sort of elder statesman. And but just putting some of those people on trial, even for just lying, could have a deterrent effect on the future. But yeah, we need to kind of do that if we're going to actually make change. If we just keep on going through the same processes, we're going to have the same problems. That's it. Sorry, I ran away.
You're already doing 3 hours, David. Can you still manage, or are you getting tired?
Oh, I'm pretty happy. My dog's getting a bit annoyed. He's like, come on, I've got to go outside. Anyway,
Yeah.
I don't know. The listeners are probably getting pretty tired, but I'm just I'm doing a lot of talking. I'm happy to listen to other people.
To the listeners, I can just say that we already agreed, like, we will do like a weekly broadcast of this. So we will fill you in on all other new updates and information regarding this situation David is in, right? And so that will be great. I mean, the fact that you can give updates every week, and that we keep this going, right? And it won't be silenced. It won't be like hidden.
Well,
Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's important. It's important to me to, and I can give updates on my own case. I can give updates on Australia, and also we can talk about, the events like the latest bombing in Syria. We can talk about other things. I can read up on other things, and because I've got an insider's perspective to say this is what I see from someone that used to work in the war machine, for want of a better word. I can see that this is my take on such and such a thing. Like I was able to see in the ISIS. I think I talked about it last week in the bombing campaign. There were a lot of the things we were claiming victory for. We were just bombing sand dunes.
Yeah.
And saying, we'd achieved a huge amount. But I could read through the lines, and I could also see a lot of the fake, as part of information operations, we put out fake images as well. There was one popular one of a supposedly of ISIS throwing a gay man off a building or whatever. And while that may have happened somewhere, I don't know. I suspected that was a fake photo in order to to get progressives on side for the war. They realise they can't just get the normal people on side. Glory was talking about it. Getting the consent. Manufacturing consent for the war. One good way to get consent for the war in ISIS was to show them killing gay people or something, and I could see that some images which were just too neat and too perfect in order to make certain sections support the war were being produced, and it was the sort of, as a lawyer, you get involved in that because you have to sign off on false imaging.
Yeah.
Which we're allowed to do, and so I can recognise it sometimes and say, no, that's likely a false image, which is put out there in order to have a certain effect on the population,
And even though even if it's not a false image, then the timing matters too, right? Like they decide when to release it.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly, and it's no. And the way that it's presented, and the way that there's no balance there to say, well, this, both sides, do the same thing or whatever. There's a real there's a lack of balance. Anyone that's on our side is their own faults are pushed up, and they had one of those problems where people pointed out that some of these very violent and extremist groups in Syria, who we were paying, were and the West were paying, were really, like committing sort of human sacrifice and torturing, and that was a kind of an awkward moment, and we had to sort of suddenly change the narrative and demonise the enemy. But we have to. If terrible things go on with people we're associated with, they get covered up, and we quickly try to find terrible things with our enemies. But that's every bit as much a war as the bombing war. And the problem is that they don't. There's no one there saying, yeah, really, that's stretching the truth a little bit. We shouldn't be doing that, because it's considered anything goes. And if you can, false images. I saw that at the grassroots in Afghanistan, where we might, drop a notebook or something into the, which has the name of it, supposedly has the names of informers in it, but really we're trying to get someone who's a key Taliban person killed by that false information. Now, we do that on a grand scale. I mean, the weapons of mass destruction was a bit like that, but we will use false information against our enemy, get it leaked, and then use that as a justification for something else, or try to get actions on it. And I find that very disturbing, because all my reading of the various different legal books or whatever, there didn't seem to be any limit on it. There was nothing to say, well, there's a limit to false information, or we can't do it in relation to our own domestic audience, or we can't. There are certain things we shouldn't, we draw a line under. There was no line, and if anything went. as I said, I mean, I may end up being the victim of it myself, but there is no. Once they decide where the lines are drawn and who the enemy is and who the enemy isn't, it's a free for all for people to make up things about what went on and who did what and get it on social media and that I think is disturbing, because where does it stop and what's going to happen if people don't start pointing that out and saying, hang on, we need to stop getting involved in that. I mean, where are we going to be in 20 years' time? It's going to be very dystopian indeed if the governments have free rein to just make stuff up and put it on the internet and say it's true and justify certain actions. And you can understand it. It's particularly bad, apart from just the fact it's breaking the law. It's bad because that's, as I said, it doesn't fool the people on the ground in Syria. It doesn't fool the people on the ground in Afghanistan, and it makes terrorists. Who wouldn't want to fight us if we make up stuff, put it on the internet, totally wrong, and then we start dropping bombs as a result. I mean, who wouldn't want to fight against an organisation that does that, and also at the same time claims to be the world's good guys? I mean, that's we're setting ourselves up for failure if we carry on like that. Another job for glory.
Yeah, like I was waiting till they jump on. I don't want to be the only one asking questions. Let me look at the chat, by the way, if there's any new questions.
I was just getting ready. I just went back to the Rockfin chat and was in the middle of typing out a thank you.
Oh yeah, I saw it.
Camila Stoll.
I'm a bit. I'm fascinated, Steve, by something you said before about censorship of the YouTube. How's that working? How do they do that? They just shut you down, or do they blur it out, or?
So you can get censored through the algorithm by YouTube never sharing your content where it shows up in a recommended in the recommended column, never shows up on the front page, doesn't give notifications to the people who subscribe to the show, so they don't know when we're live. In some cases, it actually doesn't tell people at all that it doesn't show up on their page that we're live. When we put it out through Twitter, it was disappearing on people's feeds, or you'll see where there will be an equal or almost equal number of likes and retweets, which means that somebody who follows you will see it, like it, retweet it, but they'll be the only person that sees it, because it very rarely should, due to the number of people who should have eyes on it, will you ever have a balanced number of likes and retweets, unless it's the number of people who are seeing it is significantly limited.
Wow. See, that's interesting, but that in some ways is quite reassuring. It shows that we've got a message that they're worried about, but also it's nice. It shows you that there is something wrong in the world when that's happening. It can't be right that they want to censor free speeches. And I said, it's not as if we're talking about anything really particularly contentious. I'm trying to make sure that our government and the militaries follow the law. It's hardly some sort of explosive, terrible thing that needs to be kept from people. And the idea that where they're using taxpayer money to stop people getting such an inflammatory idea out, as the governments need to follow their own laws. It's a pretty, it's a terrible state of affairs. But again, it spurs me on. It makes me just want to go on further. But I'm so grateful to you, because it shows you the sort of big forces we're up against, and without you guys, no one would be hearing this. So it's fantastic.
Yeah, but we've all been dealing with it. I mean, like, it's not just on YouTube. Okay, so in YouTube they don't show you in the algorithms over there. They won't allow you to ever monetize a video. Not that we ever even apply to that, but I mean, they won't allow that standard. But so that's one thing. But on Twitter they shadow ban you, in the sense that on these very specific moments, for example, like 13 hours before Julian Assange was taken from the embassy, they put my account on full shadow ban. I had a pretty big account and was actively involved with trying to get people on the streets, because we knew they were going to take him like a week before it happened. So we were like pushing to people to go to the streets there and protest. 13 hours before it happened, they shadow banned me. And that meant like no one who wasn't, only the people who were following me on Twitter were able to see my tweets. They didn't show up in the search. For the word Assange, I put the hashtag Assange in, right? And then you type in the word Assange,
Oh yeah.
you wouldn't see my tweets. They were invisible. Right? So they're completely gone. And on Facebook we had something similar in the past when we were still streaming on there. People were trying to share the show, and when they shared more than twice, their entire account got locked, and then they get like a message: you've been abusing the sharing option. You're not allowed to share for the next 3 days or for the next 7 days. You'll get that message in their face, just for sharing our show. Nothing, and there wasn't even anything illegal in it. It was just a normal show.
Yeah, it's very worrying, isn't it?
This is
It's very worrying.
Yeah, it goes on everywhere, and so that's why I always say, like, even today with the show, just to make sure shadow bans aren't affecting it, please share it with like a quote tweet, because that means that it's not your tweet, it is actually their tweet, because they put a little message. So then Twitter has to shadow ban all of them.
Yeah, I had to do that last week when I shared your show. Yeah.
Yeah, so then Twitter can't stop this one single point. They have to literally shadow ban everyone to stop it, and that's kind of an attempt to at least do some damage control for us, right? I mean,
Yeah, no, it's funny. I mean, that can only be government operatives or people with government sympathies working in those organisations. I mean, as I said, this is why it confounds me. I mean, I'm for good government. I'm for I'm for doing the right thing, and the idea that they're trying to ban me and say, well, what does that say about the people that don't want to hear me? That can only really be against truth in government, against doing the right things, and it's worrying. But yeah, as I go, it spurs us on to keep going.
Yeah, I'm just saying it for listeners. I keep just repeating it. I mean, it's important that they remember that this is actually going on in their face, and like the moment we start accepting this, it's too late. Like, we can't be accepting it. We have to like always mention it and always attempt to circumvent it. Like, we can't accept it, because this is like censoring free speech or censoring press. If you start accepting that, you're like you're pulling fascism in, right? Or whatever oppression there is.
Yeah, sure. That's how it starts, and who gets to decide? As I said, and it's a really. There's no doubt that I'm a well-intentioned person that wants people to follow the law. And if they're trying to censor me, what does that say about them? It's kind of a strange. It's a strange thing.
We can hear you now, I think.
Oh, you can? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was, because I was saying, like a couple minutes ago, before I realized that my mic was tripping, I was saying how It's absolutely insane how the then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Mike we lied, we cheated, we stole Pompeo, literally sanctioned family members of the ICC because they finally decided to start looking into U.S. war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it's crazy to think that this is how you get treated the moment you try to even kind of get some form of accountability at least.
Yeah, that's an outrageous thing, and that should be made to hang around their head as much as possible, because that says so much for them to say, we're not even going to allow, how dare you even open investigations into our troops. We're going to do illegal things against you because you're even going to investigate war crimes, which is their job. And it can only... it can only be indicative of criminal conduct. There is no way that investigators should be stopped from doing their job and put sanctions on family members. And this is what we know about. What are they doing behind the scenes? They're probably backgrounding them and trying to destabilise the prosecutors. And this is one of the things that happens, and this is what happened to me. Once you're declared an enemy of the state, the security services start working behind the scenes. There's probably, as I said, there's probably looking at underhand ways that the International Criminal Court members are being undermined. Now that Pompeo's basically said they're enemies of the US state, and that's a terrible thing to think that we would undermine law enforcement officials. And simply because they're investigating the US. I mean, the US doesn't care about them investigating anybody else. They only care about them investigating their own people, and they're not doing it themselves. So it's very creepy, and and the fact that they were able to come out and Mike Pompeo, makes headlines saying it, and no one with the mainstream media really jumps on it and says this is a criminal thing to do. He's treated like he's some sort of statesman. It's a terrible thing, and in some ways I'm glad they did it, because it's something you can hold up and say these are not good guys. These are guys. It's like a criminal gang who threaten investigators for doing their job, and that can only mean that they feel they've got something to. And the idea that the US has never done anything wrong, and the International Criminal Court is actually the criminals, is just outrageous.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, they particularly hate the International Criminal Court because the International Criminal Court doesn't fall into their scapegoat trap and won't just be pulling out a few corporals. The International Criminal Court will be looking at the leaders, and that's what scares them. And that's why they're trying to undermine it in every step of the way, because it's exactly what they don't want. Someone to sort of say, well, the responsibility for the atrocities that went on in Afghanistan has to sit with the people that sent them there and didn't do anything, and who knew that things were going wrong and just turned a blind eye to it. And of course, that's really scares them, and so that's why they're going over the top and putting sanctions against family members. But again, it's good. The truly bad people will always come undone by their own excesses, and it's a good thing in some ways, because you can hold it and say, look, these are not good people. Anyone that's trying to undermine the investigation process before it's even begun has obviously got something to hide, and obviously treats the law as a joke.
Well, we discussed the International Criminal Court last week too a bit, and the o- the thing is, the Americans are trying to stop the ICC from investigating Afghanistan, and I mean they've openly sabotaged the efforts and threatened with sanctions against it too. Um, we know, like in the case of like Bosnia, the Yugoslavia, that the ICC acted, and in 1986 it convicted the United States in the Nicaragua case. I mean, uh, but my main problem with ICC is it takes so long, right, for these processes to happen. It can take
Yep.
2 decades for before something happens. Yeah,
Yeah, it takes a while, but it's better than nothing.
that's true. That's true.
And they do a very thorough job. I knew someone that worked on the tribunal for Yugoslavia, and I was really impressed with how thorough it was. I mean, they really, if you got convicted by them, you were definitely guilty because they were so thorough. They were so legalistic, and they even they recreated the exact fall of bullet shot, from a machine gun. Red line here, red line there, red line. It was really, it was laborious. I wouldn't have wanted to work there myself. It sounded good, but you could spend 10 years on one case, and it was like watching a glacier move. But they did, at least they did the right thing. And I think the good thing about it is you don't have to convict everybody. But if you get a few key people, at least it shows, it deters the others. And I think that's why Pompeo's scared of them, because he knows that they do have clout, and they could. And even if they issue an arrest warrant, and that makes people's lives difficult. And so thank God that that they exist. And the next thing we know, they'll be smeared, and there'll be some sort of terrible story about how bad they are, trying to distract, personally for some sort of bribery or something, and distract the fact from their core mission that they're actually, what they're doing is exposing war crimes, I'm probably going to have to go soon. My dog's had enough. And I'm also worried that the listeners won't want to hear me again, because they'll be saying, that guy again. Bloody hell. I've heard him for hours and hours. Let me get somebody new.
Leave them wanting more, David.
I can hear them wanting
You
more.
have
That's
a
right, Steve.
wonderful voice, David. It's all right.
So I'm probably going to have to sign off, but I've really enjoyed it. And again, it's been terrific, because it's just so good to know that there are people out there that care and are onto this kind of thing. And while we don't have a solution at the moment, the more people know, as you pointed out, the more the WikiLeaks idea was just people to know what's going on, and the more people that know and that care, the better it is. And so I'm very grateful. If you've sat through the whole thing, or even if you've just listened to a bit, I'm super grateful to you, just for listening and just for caring, and keep up the good fight, because people like me, we go under if we think nobody's listening. So thank you. You've actually done something useful to make the world a better place just by listening and just tuning in, because that's that is part of the process. Whistleblowers can't exist without people who are interested in what they've got to say. And so I'm really grateful for the show, and anybody that's listened. Keep up the good fight, because I really think we can win this. I really think that there is a bit of a change, and we can certainly Julian Assange may well get let out. I may well win my case. There's a couple of other people in Australia. We might win our cases, and that will be a huge sea change where things, and people will come after us. People will come after them, and we can reverse the trajectory and really make a difference and really be on the right side of history and have done something we can be really proud of. And I believe that. I think it's good news. There's light at the end of the tunnel, and we just need to keep going.
Yeah, and to listeners, I want to add to that you can help us by sharing this, and also visiting David's Twitter account. That's where you're most active, right, on Twitter?
Yeah, that's where that's where you're more likely to get people that are interested and people that actually care about the issues on Twitter. So that's what I stick to. I don't know how much I'm being shadow banned, but it's certainly I got a lot more followers after last week's show, so that's great. So I'm really grateful for that, because that really helps. I've got a magic figure. I reckon if I can get to 10,000 followers, I won't. It'll be harder and harder for them to put me in jail.
Yeah.
They arrested a French guy who had 10,000 followers, and he was protesting against the sort of a dodgy mining company, and he got let out pretty fast when they realised he just had too much of a following.
Yeah, exactly. That scares them, right? It's all about the media. It's all about perception.
Yeah, it's important. Yeah, no, we have to fight them at their own game, and if all they care about is the public opinion, we just need to get public opinion on side.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll probably do same time next week, I guess. We'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If anybody cares, it'd be good.
David, it's always wonderful to talk to you. I'm glad we got to do this.
Me too.
Yeah, it's great to meet you, Glory. And Steve, yeah, I know, it's great to kill two birds with one stone. I was so happy when Mark said you were coming along, because I enjoyed the other times we've talked, and I wished we'd done it again, but now we have, so it's really good. Makes me happy.
Well,
always enjoy talking to you.
They will probably come back next week too. I mean, it's all open.
That'd be good.
Yeah, this wound up starting a couple hours after our morning show ends, and we usually do an afternoon show, so if this is it, fucking great.
It's perfect. Like,
It'll be easier on Sleepy J.
Right?
where is he even? Sleepy J. Is he still listening?
Sleeping,
He said
maybe.
he had a bunch of stuff to do this afternoon.
Well, I at least I see it as some sort of victory that you didn't all fall asleep on me, like some of Mark's panels.
Normally the show takes place it starts at 10 o'clock on the East Coast in the U.S. And it's still like a 4 or 5 hour show.
Heard it's 4 o'clock at night for me, right, Steve? But yeah, I'm always there. But like, yeah, realize that it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't complain. I mean, it's early in the morning here. I was meant to be meeting someone for breakfast, and I had to call them and say, look, I don't think it's going to happen. And, but my dog said, I need to go and have a long walk, because it takes it out of you a little bit, bringing up all the issues and talking. And as I said, just that's why I enjoy the laughter with you guys, because it is hard being a whistleblower. Psychologically, it's hard. And even after you give an interview, sometimes you feel a bit down or a bit up. And you said I revived the hate of last week. And so, you need to go and take a walk and clear your head a little bit and get back into it. But laughter and a little bit of good humour goes a long way, because you don't always get that. It can be a bit of a lonely road. So again, I'm so grateful to you guys for giving me a little bit of light relief and a little bit of intelligent conversation this morning. It gives you sort of a bit more strength to handle the various ups and downs around the corner.
You're not alone though. I mean, I said that last week too to you, but there's like a lot of people in the anonymous community, especially leaking and whistleblowing, but they're keeping their anonymity because of fears of being prosecuted and actually getting in a similar situation as you are in. And but there is more and more people who are actually do try something, and you're absolutely not alone. And I know that Anons are in solidarity with you, with your case, and they're sharing it, and they're
Yeah, that's good. That makes me so happy. And again, I can't thank them enough, because there are times when I'm pretty close to the edge, and so every time someone shares, every time someone talks about it, it really does help me, and I know it helps the other people out there too who are in similar situations. So yeah, if we stick together, we'll win this, and that's the greatest thing, you know. It's not about protecting, but it's about actually getting some results, and we can be so proud of it. I always hold up, you know, the Vietnam War as an example, as, you know, the way that the activists and the protesters, they eventually had a win on that, and that's something anyone who was involved with would be really proud of themselves. That we can win, you know, and it's a great thing to be a part of, helping others and have solidarity, because at the end of the day, we're doing this for the right reasons, and I think that's a great thing.
yeah. And we got another thing going for us, or at least you have that. Just like in the Assange case, they're so obsessed with shadow banning and censoring things because they don't want people to know about it. And like, when you talk to people on in the streets, and they don't know about it, but if you explain them the story, like, they're actually always supportive, because they are shocked by hearing it, and that's the thing.
Yeah, that's it. As I said, I got very disillusioned. You know, the intellectuals of the world, the ones who you should be writing the opinion pieces and whatever, they haven't done enough. But every time I speak to what I would call a normal person at a bus stop or whatever, they get it, and they're outraged. They go, "That's bullshit," you know, "That's bullshit." And people, if people hear the story, they get it, and they're outraged. And that's great, you know. So if we can just need to, you know, my dream is to do, you know, popular talk shows or something. We might have to do our own thing, because I think the average person gets that they're angry that they've been fooled by people that they trust, and because they're the ones that pay for wars, they pay through their taxes, they pay through their lives of their children's and nieces and nephews, and it's yeah, when they find out that they've been kind of conned, they're the ones that go, "That's terrible." And not only that, when they hear about whistleblowers being, you know, destroyed because they tried to do the right thing, yeah, the average person is like, "That doesn't sound right," because it isn't right. And if we can get through to those people, we can only win.
Yeah, and if you talk about the educational system, I mean, that's maybe a final thing. Like, the longer you are in the educational system, and you deal with so-called like people who educate you on politics or on geopolitics or warfare, yeah, they're also indoctrinating you. And we don't have Sleepy Josh on right now, but I can tell you, being from the coding world myself, and Sleepy Josh can easily confirm this too, that we learned this from just buying a book and reading about it, right? There was no formal education for coding, for learning how to code in that sense. If you're really interested in learning something, you can research these things yourself, and it's, see that. So that's the thing. Normal people, yeah, whatever you call them, a certain kind of people, intellectuals, because they've spent more time in the college studying whatever science. But it's
studying CIA talking points. That's what it is.
yeah, that's what it comes down to these days, right? I mean, yeah.
Well, that's right. That famous CIA quote, you know, that once people everything they believed is wrong, you know, we will have succeeded. But that's true about the self-education. I mean, Einstein, I don't know, I'm not an expert, but I do know he was largely self-educated. And he was able to say, yeah, you know, things like, yeah, we can make an atomic bomb. And whereas a lot of the experts in the area were like, no, it can't be done. People, as you said, but the professors from the universities were like, no. and he was actually knew more about things from educating himself, because he wasn't constrained by the popular, line that professors said, this can't be done, this can't be done. And you're right, it's a sort of a powerful thing. I'm self-educated in the ways of geopolitics, because I sort of saw things at the coalface, and as I said, everything has been tested. It's not from any kind of dogma, but just because I saw that when we did this and we said this, that it was wrong, and increasingly so. And things have got out. The idea that we can just advertise our way out of a problem, it's got out of hand now. And now that's the solution to everything: is make up a good story and sell it to the public. And that's it's going to go so far. And again, we need to that we're on the right track to try to combat that. So so much of what we think we know is being sold, and that's the root of the problem. Is democracies are great, but if everything is governed by popular opinion, it means that a lot of effort and money now is just going into forming people's opinions without actually doing anything positive to back that up. Because they realise, we don't need to actually do anything. We just need people to like us. And if we can short-circuit that thing and make people like us with false statements, well, that achieves the goal. And so in some ways, democracies are have become dangerous. And for all China's faults, I was thinking about it, because it's not a democracy, they don't see war, they don't idolise war, or they don't see war as a sort of a way to solve domestic problems. They see war as for what it really is, that citizens will get bombed, and if anything, it will destabilise them, because if there's a bombing campaign against China, there might be revolutions, and that can only be a bad thing. And they don't see war as a solution to domestic issues, and they could see it could actually cause more problems than it solves, which is obviously quite logical. But those countries that have got to win elections every 3 or 4 years can sometimes see war as a way to win the election, and even though it has terrible costs, but they think, well, if we spin it enough, we'll get away with it. And countries that don't have to, democracies, unless they're using it as a game, they're using it as a way to hold on to power and gather public support. A logical country wouldn't go to war easily, because there's so many downsides, and all the time that they do it is in order to get a different result, that is to get people to like you by telling you that it's a good war because we're fighting some sort of very evil force. I read a quote about it last week, which is exactly right, and it said, if governments are allowed to break the law in the case of an emergency, they will create emergencies. And that's exactly right. If a government becomes more popular by bombing, evil regimes, the government will find some evil regime, or create them, and that's that's one of the central problems. I better go. I better do a dog walk.
Yeah. Talk soon.
Talking to you. The dog's looking at me now. I wish I could send you a photo of him. He's like, come on already. And great to meet you, Glory. Keep up the good work. We need your generation involved.
I'll try. Thank you. It was great.
You get photos. You'll be like the Vietnam vet. You'll be able to sort of show the photos of the dinosaurs you used to work with, and you can dine out on it. Yeah, you're involved, so that's good. That's good. You keep it up for the next generation. And it's interesting because it's all about spin. It's all about social media now. It's all about it is all, it's very, very topical, and it's it's interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank
Well,
you
I'll let
so
you go.
much, my friend.
No, not at all.
It's always good to talk to you.
It's good to talk to you. It's so good. You've really helped me. I feel a lot stronger having spoken to you, and I've had a bit of a laugh. And I look forward to speaking to you again. Hopefully,
We'll
soon.
do it again next week.
Yeah,
Don't worry about it,
definitely.
David.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I'll write another long list in the meantime.
Yeah, please do, please do. It has to be even longer than this one.
We better keep the listeners on side. I mean, they get to ask some questions, and so they actually find they're not going, "Oh my God, he's so boring." I wish he'd talk about something I care about. We'll have to find out what people want to hear about.
We'll talk about what brand of scrunchie AOC uses for her ponytail.
That's all people care about.
Yeah, we'll do a deep dive into that.
What to wear when you're getting arrested. That was one of the things when I got arrested at the airport. I was laughing about that. If you know you're going to get arrested at the airport, and what clothing you should be wearing when you get arrested. And I was thinking, well,
Like dress for perceived innocence.
yeah. Well, I knew I'd have to sleep. I knew I'd have to sleep in the in my clothes, and so and I was going to be a long haul flight anyway. So I had my what we call a tracksuit here, my training gear on, and there were no press there, but there could have easily been press there, and so it was quite practical having your training gear on, because at least when they chuck you in the cell, you can sleep in it. And it was if you're in a suit, it's not going to be so good. But saying that, it was quite good. If you get arrested and you're just in your track gear, everyone at the airport that was looking at me, they just think you're a drug dealer. So no one pays any attention. If you've got a baseball cap on and you've got a track, they think, oh, another drug dealer. and if I'd had a suit on, they might have paid more attention. They might have got their photos out and started taking photos for the internet, because they might have thought I was either a pedophile or a politician. So yeah, you've got to think about
the same suit.
I know, you've got to, but they might have treated me better. Yeah, I don't know. You've got to. I wasn't sure. I didn't really come to a definitive thing. Wearing something which is comfortable is good, but you might get a bit more respect if you've got a coat and tie. So yeah, maybe we can make it fashion, activist fashion next week. I don't know. But in the meantime, Glory, call you Misty Glory, is going to solve the problems of how to make whistleblowing, how to make people care. Big task.
I'll try.
Yeah. Well, even just your attitudes, from what your student buddies or whatever, what they care about. That's interesting, I guess. What they don't care about.
Yeah.
It's important to find out, I guess. Anyway, I got to go. Great to talk to you. Love you, and Steve and Mark, and thank you, Mark, for having me on the show. It's been great, and thank you particularly to the listeners. Thank you so much for the listeners. It really means a lot, and we can win this with your help. Okay, signing off.
Okay, take
Dog
care.
walk.